The sharp, sickening crunch of a $1,200 smartphone shattering against polished porcelain tile echoed through the Little Rock promenade. I stood perfectly still, watching the blood drain from my ex-husband's face, leaving his complexion the color of day-old ash. He thought I was a desperate, discarded woman begging for scraps. He thought he and my former best friend had successfully destroyed my life and left me to rot in the Arkansas Delta. What he did not know was that the woman standing in front of him was no longer his submissive wife. I was the principal consultant holding the undeniable leverage to dismantle his entire financial empire. My name is Tina, and I am 50 years old. Today I stood in the bustling corridor of a luxury shopping center, wearing a tailored navy blazer, watching the man who ruined my family realize he had just picked a fight with the wrong woman. How old are you, and where are you tuning in from? Drop your age and city in the comments below. Welcome to Emily Told Stories. Hit the like button and subscribe because you will not want to miss this execution. Let us rewind exactly 5 seconds. Outside, the Arkansas summer baked the asphalt, but inside the air-conditioned mall, the climate was cool and controlled. The air smelled of roasted espresso beans and expensive perfume. I was waiting near a coffee kiosk, holding a chilled iced latte, when the ghosts of my past materialized. Derek strolled up with the same arrogant tilt to his chin he had perfected during our 2-decade marriage. He wore a crisp linen shirt, unbuttoned just enough to project casual wealth. Beside him stood Valerie. 3 years ago, she was the woman I called my best friend. Now she was the woman sleeping in my former bed. Valerie balanced a buttery leather designer tote on her forearm while ending a phone call. She sighed, projecting theatrical exasperation. "It is a nightmare," she complained into the receiver, loud enough for nearby shoppers to turn their heads. "Another severe shipping delay from Milan. If the inventory does not clear customs by Tuesday, the seasonal launch is ruined." She tapped the screen to end the call and slid the device into her purse before pretending to just notice me standing there. Her pristine stilettos clicked against the tile as she shifted her weight. Derek looked me up and down. He took in my solitary stance and my practical leather loafers, interpreting my quiet demeanor as defeat. His lips curled into a familiar derisive smirk. The kind of smile meant to make you feel 2 inches tall. "Wow," he drawled, his voice carrying over the hiss of the espresso machine. "I can almost smell the desperation." Valerie stepped forward, offering a saccharine smile that failed to reach her eyes. She fished a glossy promotional flyer from her bag. "Tina, sweetie," she purred, extending the paper toward my chest. "We are actually hiring stock girls for my new upscale home goods boutique, 18 an hour. Everyone deserves a fresh start, especially at your age." My pulse remained steady. 3 years ago, the sight of them together would have sent me into a spiral of hyperventilation and tears. I would have screamed or thrown my coffee. But the southern grit I inherited from my grandparents had long since burned away my fragility. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a biting retort. The mall patrons bustled past us, oblivious to the silent war unfolding by the coffee stand. Instead of taking her flyer, I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. My fingers bypassed personal items and found the heavy matte-finished cardstock I kept neatly stacked in a brass case. I retrieved a single embossed business card and extended my arm, sliding it deliberately between Valerie and her manicured fingers. The raised black ink caught the overhead fluorescent lighting. It read, "Tina Hughes, Principal Consultant, Hughes Supply Chain and Logistics." Valerie stared at the card, her brow furrowing in confusion. Derek leaned in close to her shoulder to read the text. I watched his eyes scan the letters. The smirk melted off his face, replaced by a sudden, hollow realization. The man who had spent the last 3 years believing he had buried me alive suddenly recognized the name of the top operational efficiency firm in the Delta. He knew that name because my firm was currently dominating the regional manufacturing sector he worked in. His fingers went slack. The expensive smartphone he was holding tumbled from his grip, plummeting toward the hard floor. The screen spiderwebbed upon impact, sending shards of glass skittering across the grout lines. "Enjoy your afternoon," I whispered. I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving the shattered pieces exactly where they belonged. The hum of the tires against the asphalt of Interstate 30 provided a steady, rhythmic soundtrack as I drove away from the Little Rock Promenade. The afternoon sun dipped low over the Arkansas River, casting long, golden shadows across the highway. I rested my hands lightly on the leather steering wheel of my SUV, letting the crisp air conditioning wash over my face. The memory of Derek dropping his expensive phone played on a continuous loop in my mind. The sheer panic in his eyes was a rich, deeply satisfying reward. My posture was straight. My breathing was even. It was a stark contrast to the shattered, hollow woman I was 3 years ago. Back then, I was nothing more than the invisible scaffolding holding up his perfect facade. Derek managed a sprawling regional manufacturing plant in the Delta. He wore the expensive custom suits. He shook hands with politicians and investors. He took all the credit for the upward trajectory of his career. I managed the chaos behind the curtain. I had sacrificed my own early career ambitions in supply chain logistics to raise our son Cody, ensuring he had a constant, nurturing presence at home while his father traveled the country. I ran our household like a military operation so Derek could climb the corporate ladder without a single domestic distraction. I packed the school lunches. I balanced the household ledgers. I even proofread his quarterly production reports late into the night while he slept. I was the silent partner in his success. The betrayal did not arrive with a cinematic, tearful confession. Selfish men rarely possess the courage for honest conversations. The destruction of my marriage arrived on a humid Tuesday afternoon in the form of a misfiled piece of paper. I was in his home office, organizing the filing cabinets. The room smelled of expensive leather and stale coffee. I was searching for our quarterly property tax records before the county deadline. Slipped between two mundane utility folders was a thick manila envelope. The return address belonged to a high-end commercial real estate broker located in downtown Little Rock. My brow furrowed. We were not in the market for commercial property. I slid the stapled pages out of the envelope and spread them across his mahogany desk. It was a binding commercial property lease for a retail space in the most expensive shopping district in the city. I scanned the dense legal terms. The required upfront deposit was staggering. It represented years of quiet frugality, clipping coupons and skipping vacations so we could build a secure nest egg. Then my eyes dropped to the funding source listed on the second page. It was a direct routing number tied to our primary joint savings account. The exact account I thought held our retirement funds and the college tuition money for Cody. I flipped to the final page, my breath turning shallow and ragged. 2 signatures rested on the dotted lines, authorizing the devastating withdrawal. The first was Derek and his rigid, jagged print. The second name stole the oxygen directly from my lungs. Valerie. It was not just her printed name. It was the exact handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, lunch receipts, and shared secrets for 10 years. It was an overly flourished, loopy script. Valerie always dotted the lowercase I with a distinct, drawn-out heart. I traced the blue ink with a trembling finger. That stupid little heart proved my husband and my best friend were secretly building a life together, using my life savings as their foundation. Valerie was the woman who sat on my back porch, drinking Pinot Noir, listening to my deepest insecurities about my marriage. She had weaponized my vulnerabilities to seduce my husband. I did not cry. The shock was too profound for tears. I sat in his leather desk chair, staring at the wall, until he walked through the front door at 6 o'clock. He loosened his silk tie, complaining about a delayed freight shipment at the plant. I walked into the kitchen and slid the lease across the granite island. He stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. He did not deny it. He did not fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. He just let out a long, heavy sigh, as if I were a child who had interrupted an important meeting. "You were snooping," he stated, pouring himself a glass of neat bourbon. "You emptied our life savings to buy Valerie a boutique," I replied, keeping my voice eerily calm despite the tremor in my hands. He took a sip, leaning casually against the marble counter. "I made an investment, Tina. Something this family needs. Look around. Our life is stagnant. You are stagnant. Valerie has vision. She has drive. You just make grocery lists and fold laundry. I need a partner who understands ambition." The cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. He had taken my 20 years of unpaid labor, the very foundation that allowed his ambition to thrive, and dismissed it as stagnant. The ensuing divorce was a swift, brutal execution. Derek hired a team of ruthless corporate attorneys. Because I had not drawn a formal paycheck in 2 decades, the court viewed my financial contributions as negligible. The legal system favored the primary breadwinner. He secured the sprawling brick house in the suburbs, he secured the primary investment portfolios, and he officially secured Valerie, parading her around our social circle before the ink on the settlement was even dry. I was given a modest alimony stipend and pushed out the door like expired goods. I found myself sitting on a cheap canvas sofa inside a rented duplex in Hot Springs. The paint was peeling around the window frames. The air smelled of old carpet and lemon disinfectant. Outside, the vast forested hills of the Ouachita Mountains loomed in the distance, casting long, dark shadows over the small tourist town. The hot springs brought a transient energy to the area, but I felt entirely invisible among the crowds. I had lost my identity as a wife and a mother in a pristine neighborhood. Cody was off at college, leaving me entirely alone. I had lost my financial security. But losing the woman I thought was my sister in spirit left a hollow, painful cavity in my chest. I spent exactly 2 weeks staring at those forested hills, mourning the ghost of a life that never really existed. I let the grief wash over me in the quiet isolation of that duplex. Then one morning, I woke up and stopped crying. The women in my family did not surrender to misfortune. My grandmother survived the Great Depression, farming the fertile delta lands of eastern Arkansas. She knew how to cultivate a harvest from dirt and grit. That same stubborn resilience ran through my veins. Derek assumed my lack of a corporate title meant I lacked intelligence. He believed my subservience was a permanent condition. He was wrong. Running a flawless household, raising a child, and managing a volatile executive schedule required the exact same strategic logistics as running a Fortune 500 company. My analytical mind was still sharp. I just needed to convince the outside world to see my potential. I needed an income to survive, but as I began drafting my resume, the daunting reality of my situation set in. I was a middle-aged woman preparing to face an unforgiving job market, armed with nothing but a 20-year gap in employment. The battle for my independence was just beginning. The first 12 months of my forced independence tested the precise limits of my sanity as I faced the brutal, unforgiving reality of ageism in the modern workforce. I desperately needed a steady stream of income to pay the rent on my cramped Hot Springs duplex, but the corporate market functioned as an impenetrable fortress locked tight against a middle-aged woman carrying a 2-decade gap on her professional resume. I spent my early mornings drinking cheap instant coffee while printing copies of a document that felt useless in my hands. My previous life did not translate into the sterile bullet points preferred by digital sorting algorithms. I drove my aging sedan across the sprawling Arkansas Delta for weeks on end, navigating the flat, fertile plains and towering industrial parks. The rich soil stretched for miles, serving as a testament to growth and endurance. Yet I felt barren inside my car. The southern heat baked the asphalt, sending shimmering waves of distortion radiating up from the highway, while crop dusters traced faint lines across the pale blue sky. I sat in harsh fluorescent light, breathing in the scent of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt break room coffee. I was always surrounded by recent college graduates who tapped rapidly on their sleek digital devices. They wore trendy business casual attire and possessed the easy, unearned confidence of youth. I sat quietly in my modest navy blazer, holding a worn leather portfolio, feeling like a ghost haunting a world that had long since moved on without me. Every ticking second on the wall clocks echoed the relentless, rapid passage of my own fading time. My ultimate breaking point arrived during a mid-morning interview at a regional logistics firm located in Pine Bluff. I was seated across a thick glass desk from a human resources director who looked far too young to hold any position of genuine authority. Her nameplate read Madison. She wore a pristine white silk blouse and possessed smooth, unlined skin that had clearly never known a single sleepless night of true, agonizing panic. She flipped through the solitary page of my resume with a polite, detached expression. Her manicured fingernails tapped a rhythmic, dismissing beat against the polished glass surface of her desk. "So, Tina," she began, her tone adopting the gentle, patronizing cadence one might typically reserve when speaking to a confused, elderly relative. "I see you have extensive experience managing a household budget, coordinating volunteer charity events, and running school fundraisers. That is all very quaint, but we are actively looking for someone who understands high-stakes operational pressure. The commercial supply chain industry is incredibly fast-paced. We need decisive problem solvers who do not crumble when a vendor misses a deadline." The word "quaint" hung in the sterile air conditioning of her corner office. It was an invisible blade that slid directly between my ribs. She looked at my 20 years of silent sacrifice and saw nothing but PTA meetings and grocery lists. She had no idea who was sitting on the opposite side of her expensive desk. My mind instantly snapped back to a bitter January night exactly 10 years ago. A severe, unseasonal ice storm had descended upon the entire region, paralyzing the state of Arkansas. The temperature had plummeted to single digits, freezing the sap in the trees until heavy branches snapped like gunfire in the darkness. The highways transformed into dangerous sheets of black ice, and the regional power grid flickered violently under the immense weight of the freezing rain. Derek was managing a critical quarterly production run at his manufacturing plant. Millions of dollars in raw materials were stranded on commercial trucks, stalled across 3 different county lines. If those essential materials did not reach the assembly line by morning, the plant would miss a strict international shipping deadline, and Derek would face immediate termination from the board of directors. Derek had paced our living room for a single hour, cursing the weather and blaming everyone else for his lack of foresight before drinking 3 heavy glasses of scotch and passing out on the sofa, surrendering entirely to the crisis. I did not surrender. While my husband slept off his panic, I commandeered his laptop and spread physical highway maps across our dining room table. For 48 consecutive hours, I stayed awake, fueled by black coffee and sheer maternal adrenaline. I called independent truckers, pleading, negotiating, and bribing them to take alternate rural routes. I mapped out safe passages using county dirt backroads that the local weather reports had ignored. I calculated fuel loads and bridge weight capacities in my head while listening to the sleet batter our windows. I manually rerouted his entire manufacturing freight line, coordinating delivery schedules down to the exact minute. When Derek woke up, 2 days later, hungover, and expecting to find a pink slip waiting in his inbox, he found his production line running at maximum capacity. He eagerly took all the credit from the executives. He received a lucrative year-end bonus for his supposed brilliant crisis management. I received a brief nod of thanks before he asked me what I was planning to cook for dinner. I blinked, returning to the present reality of the bright Pine Bluff office. I looked away from the patronizing smile of the young director and cast my gaze downward toward the carpeted floor. I was wearing a pair of scuffed, brown leather steel-toe boots. I had purchased them weeks ago, anticipating the need to walk dirty warehouse floors and industrial loading docks if I could just manage to land an entry-level supervisory role. The boots were heavy, practical, and deeply scarred from the gravel of the Delta. They were a physical symbol of genuine substance, of authentic grit, and of surviving a harsh, unforgiving reality. My mind automatically drifted to Valerie. I pictured her standing in the Little Rock Mall, wearing those pristine, fragile designer stilettos. Her footwear was entirely decorative, built strictly for carpeted rooms and easy paved paths. Her entire existence was a carefully constructed superficial facade, funded by stolen money and deceit. She would snap an ankle the very moment she had to navigate rough terrain or carry her own weight. I realized in that quiet office that I possessed a profound structural integrity that neither Valerie nor Derek could ever comprehend. I did not argue with Madison. I did not attempt to justify my existence to a girl who measured worth in hollow corporate buzzwords. I simply reached across her glass desk, retrieved my resume, and walked out of the building with my head held high. In the following weeks, the automated rejection emails piled up in my digital inbox like a slow, suffocating snowstorm. Every ping from my phone signaled another closed door, another algorithm determining I was obsolete before I ever spoke a single word. The messages were always identical. We have decided to move forward with candidates whose experience better aligns with our current corporate needs. The endless stream of polite dismissals steadily eroded my confidence, wearing down my mental defenses. Late at night, when the rented duplex felt far too empty. In those dark, silent hours, Derek and his cruel voice would inevitably echo through my memory. He insisted I was useless without his financial protection. He claimed my life was stagnant. He wanted me to truly believe that a woman stripped of her marital title was unseen by society. I sat on my cheap canvas sofa listening to the crickets chirping in the forested hills outside my window, feeling the heavy weight of his psychological programming pulling me downward. But a strange thing happens when you push a strong woman into a dark corner. The initial despair eventually runs out of oxygen, and a deep, searing anger takes its place. The anger began to burn hotter than the sadness. I realized my fundamental mistake. I was walking into their sterile corporate castles, begging for a single seat at their polished tables. I was asking permission from young gatekeepers who lacked the life experience to recognize my true operational value. Asking permission to enter their world was a losing battle, designed specifically to keep women exactly like me, locked on the outside looking in. I closed my laptop and stood up in the quiet living room. The moonlight spilled across the floorboards, illuminating the path forward. I made a silent, unbreakable vow that I would never again allow someone else to dictate my worth based on a piece of paper or a gap in employment. If the corporate gatekeepers refused to open the door for me, I would simply have to build my own door from scratch. I needed a single opportunity to prove my methodology, and fate would soon deliver that precise chance during a torrential summer storm in the heart of the mountains. The torrential summer storm battered the corrugated metal roof of the Hot Springs Agricultural Supply dealership with deafening intensity. Sheets of gray rain washed down the large storefront windows, blurring the forested hills into a muted watercolor painting. The air inside the cavernous warehouse felt thick, smelling strongly of wet canvas, motor oil, and nitrogen fertilizer. I wandered down a dimly lit aisle, holding a small tube of industrial silicone sealant. The cheap window frames in my rented duplex had finally surrendered to the severe weather, leaking muddy water onto the floorboards. I was simply a customer, seeking a temporary fix for a broken home. Fate, however, arranged a permanent solution. Near the front entrance, a man stood behind a scarred wooden checkout counter. His embroidered denim shirt bore the name Nolan. He possessed the rigid, exhausted posture of a business owner standing on the edge of bankruptcy. Deep lines etched his face, mapping years of quiet desperation. He gripped a heavy telephone receiver, pressing it so hard against his ear that his knuckles drained of blood. Nolan shouted into the mouthpiece, his voice cracking with panic. He was arguing with a regional logistics dispatcher. I paused near a display of heavy-duty tarps, remaining still and silent. "You cannot leave those combine harvesters sitting in a depot outside Memphis," he roared, the sound echoing over the thunder. "Planting season begins next Monday. If the local farmers do not receive their replacement parts by Friday morning, they will cancel their contracts. My profit margins are rotting on the asphalt. Do not tell me about the interstate way station backups. Find a detour." He slammed the receiver down onto the cradle, burying his face in his calloused hands. A heavy, oppressive silence settled over the checkout counter, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain outside. I stood perfectly still, clutching the tube of sealant. My mind, an engine that had sat dormant for far too long, suddenly sparked to life. The complex logistical puzzle hovered in my imagination, forming a three-dimensional map of the Arkansas transit routes. I knew exactly why his freight was stalled. The heavy rains always flooded the low-lying access roads near the eastern border, forcing all heavy commercial transport onto a single, congested stretch of Interstate 40. The commercial way stations lacked the staffing to process the sudden influx of cargo, creating an artificial bottleneck. I walked out from the shadows of the aisle and approached the counter. I placed my silicone sealant onto the scratched wood. Nolan did not look up. He rubbed his temples, radiating pure defeat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady and clear. He raised his head, offering a hollow, apologetic smile. "I am sorry, ma'am," he muttered, ringing up the small purchase. "The transport companies are bleeding me dry. The weather has paralyzed the entire trucking grid." "The trucking grid is paralyzed," I agreed, maintaining direct eye contact. "But the regional rail lines are currently operating at less than 40% capacity." I pointed to the yellow number 2 pencil tucked securely behind his right ear. "May I borrow that?" Nolan blinked, caught off guard by the strange request. He stared at me for a moment, evaluating the middle-aged woman wearing practical jeans and a damp navy blazer. He slowly handed over the writing utensil. I reached across the counter and pulled a blank shipping invoice from his printer tray. I smoothed the crisp paper flat against the wood. My hand moved with swift, practiced precision. I drew a crude but geographically accurate map of the eastern Delta region. I marked the congested interstate with a heavy, dark line. Then I sketched a parallel route, utilizing the intricate network of local short-line railroads that crisscrossed the agricultural plains. I had memorized these exact tracks years ago sitting at my dining room table, while Derek slept upstairs oblivious to the labor required to keep his career afloat. "You are paying premium rates for expedited highway trucking," I explained, tapping the graphite tip against the paper. "Your cargo is trapped behind 100 other desperate vendors. Call your Memphis depot. Instruct them to divert the combine harvesters to the rail junction at West Memphis. Have the freight loaded onto a flatbed train car utilizing the regional agricultural spur. The tracks run southwest, bypassing the highway gridlock entirely. The rail spur terminates less than 2 miles from this exact facility. You can hire a local independent flatbed driver to haul the parts the final 2 miles. Your inventory will arrive by tomorrow evening, saving you 3 days of delay and protecting your seasonal contracts." Nolan stared at the pencil drawing. The ambient noise of the thunderstorm seemed to fade away. He traced the graphite lines with a thick, trembling finger. He mentally calculated the transit times, realizing the brilliant simplicity of the proposed detour. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. He saw past the polite suburban exterior and recognized the sharp, tactical intellect radiating from my posture. "Who taught you how to map freight lines like this?" he asked, his voice dropping to an awe-struck whisper. "Nobody taught me," I replied, placing the yellow pencil back onto the counter. "I spent 2 decades managing crisis protocols and supply chain logistics for a manufacturing executive. I just never carried the official corporate title." Nolan did not hesitate. He picked up the telephone and immediately dialed his Memphis depot, barking the new exact routing instructions I had just designed. I paid for my hardware supplies and walked out into the pouring rain, feeling a strange, powerful warmth blooming inside my chest. The engine was running again, and it purred with lethal efficiency. 7 days passed. The severe weather broke, leaving the tourist town bathed in bright summer sunshine. I returned to the agricultural dealership, needing a replacement filter for my kitchen sink. The atmosphere inside the store had shifted dramatically. The frantic, desperate energy was gone, replaced by the bustling, productive hum of a thriving enterprise. The expensive combine parts sat proudly on the showroom floor, ready for the local farmers. Nolan spotted me from across the warehouse. He jogged over, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop towel. A bright, genuine smile stretched across his weathered face. He reached into his denim pocket and produced a sealed white envelope, pressing it firmly into my palm. "I owe you a profound debt," he said, his tone thick with gratitude. "That railspur detour bypassed the highway disaster. My inventory arrived 24 hours early. I secured every single planting contract for the season." I opened the envelope. Inside rested a certified cashier's check made out to my name. The numerical figure written across the center was $2,000. I stared at the crisp paper, feeling a sudden tightness grip my throat. During my entire marriage, my financial worth was dictated by an allowance doled out by a controlling husband. Every dollar was monitored and weaponized to enforce my submission. This check represented my very first independent earning. It did not make me wealthy, but it functioned as tangible proof that my analytical mind was a highly valuable commodity. "I need a permanent consultant," Nolan continued, gesturing toward his chaotic back office. "My internal inventory system is a disaster. I am losing capital on inefficient storage. I want to hire you to audit my entire operation. Name your hourly rate." I folded the check and slid it into my pocket, accepting the job on the spot. Walking back to my sedan, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The discarded, broken housewife was gone. In her place stood a formidable strategist. The initial victory tasted incredibly sweet, validating the quiet resilience I had nurtured during my isolation. I finally possessed the initial seed money to formally register my own logistics consulting firm. I was ready to step out of the shadows and build my empire. However, constructing a legitimate enterprise meant entering the ruthless, male-dominated forestry and agriculture sector of Arkansas. The gatekeepers in this industry were entrenched traditionalists who fiercely protected their territory and despised outsiders disrupting their established hierarchy. As I drafted my official corporate paperwork, I was unaware that my first major obstacle was already waiting in the boardroom, preparing to crush my fledgling business before it ever took its first breath. The metallic thud of the heavy brass notary stamp hitting my corporate registration paperwork sounded exactly like a gavel confirming my newfound freedom. Hughes' Supply Chain and Logistics was no longer a theoretical concept scribbled on a cheap dining room table late at night. It was a legally recognized corporate entity. I leased a modest cinder-block office near the industrial rail yard on the edge of town. The monthly rent was cheap, and the ambient rumble of passing freight trains served as a constant rhythmic reminder of the industry I was determined to conquer. I purchased second-hand drafting tables and installed dry erase boards along every available wall, mapping out regional transit routes in blue marker. The Arkansas agricultural and forestry sector operated as a closed, rigid ecosystem. It was an exclusive brotherhood, heavily dominated by generational wealth and stubborn traditionalists who conducted their most lucrative deals over cheap domestic beer and expensive imported cigars. A woman entering this rugged arena was incredibly rare. A middle-aged divorcee attempting to establish an independent logistics firm was considered a localized joke. They assumed I was dabbling in a polite hobby to pass the time. They had no concept of the dormant titan waking up inside that drafty cinderblock office. My first significant opportunity to scale the business arrived in the form of an open bid for the Washita Timber Cooperative. The cooperative managed millions of acres of raw pine across the state, and they were hemorrhaging capital on inefficient highway transport. Securing their exclusive routing contract would instantly put my firm on the map and provide genuine financial stability. However, entering that bid placed me directly in the crosshairs of James Tucker. Everyone in the Delta called him Big Jim. He owned the largest legacy trucking fleet in the county. He possessed a barrel chest, a booming theatrical voice, and a deeply entrenched belief that a woman's proper domain ended at the kitchen threshold. Word reached me quickly that Jim was actively lobbying the cooperative board members to reject my proposal before they even reviewed my data. He cornered the timber executives at the local country club, slapping them on the shoulder and pouring expensive bourbon. He painted a pathetic, diminishing picture of my operation. He insisted I lacked the essential corporate pedigree required to handle heavy industrial freight. He referred to me as a bored, lonely housewife playing business to distract myself from a failed marriage. He genuinely believed that leveraging my personal trauma would force me to quietly withdraw my bid and shrink back into the shadows. He severely miscalculated my threshold for intimidation. Instead of retreating, I spent the next 96 hours locked inside my office, staring at topographical maps of the Arkansas riverways. I needed a tactical advantage that his fleet of diesel trucks could not possibly match. Years ago, Derek had demanded I digitize his sprawling, chaotic network of vendor contacts and expense reports. To accomplish that tedious task, I had quietly taught myself basic database architecture and rudimentary coding late at night while the rest of the house slept. I dusted off those dormant programming skills now. I pored over open-source transit data and built a proprietary logistics mapping system specifically tailored to the unique wetland geography of the Delta. The Timber Cooperative held their quarterly vendor selection meeting inside a paneled conference room overlooking a sprawling lumber yard. I arrived 30 minutes early, sitting patiently on a leather bench in the reception area. The air smelled of fresh-cut pine and stale coffee. I wore my tailored navy suit and my scuffed steel-toe boots, ensuring my feet were firmly planted on reality. Through the heavy oak doors, I could hear Jim delivering his pitch. His voice boomed, projecting false confidence as he promised minor incremental discounts on standard highway diesel rates. When the doors finally swung open, Jim strode out, wiping sweat from his red forehead with a handkerchief. He froze upon seeing me waiting in the lobby. A condescending chuckle rumbled in his chest. "You are wasting your time, sweetheart," he drawled, leaning close enough for me to smell the peppermint gum masking his morning whiskey. "The board needs heavy lifters, not a neighborhood bake sale coordinator. Go home." I did not offer a sharp retort. I simply smiled a cold, razor-thin expression and walked past him into the boardroom. 7 weary timber executives sat around a sprawling mahogany table, surrounded by stacks of unimpressive highway routing proposals. I did not bother with a flashy introduction. I walked directly to the digital projector and plugged in my laptop. The screen illuminated, displaying my proprietary mapping software. The intricate digital interface showcased the dense network of logging roads, overlaid with the navigable tributaries of the Arkansas River. "Gentlemen," I began my voice cutting through the stale air with calm, surgical precision. Your current logistics model relies exclusively on highway trucking. You are paying a severe premium for diesel fuel and absorbing the cost of constant interstate delays. Big Jim Tucker just offered you a fractional discount to maintain a broken status quo. I am offering you a fundamental evolution. I clicked a button on my keyboard, bringing a dynamic, animated route to life on the screen. My software analyzes the exact weight of your raw pine yields and cross-references it with the seasonal water levels of the regional river system. Instead of loading timber onto individual flatbed trucks at the logging sites, we will route your harvest to the nearest waterway docks. We will utilize a fleet of commercial river barges to transport the bulk weight downstream to the processing mills. I paused, letting the visual data sink in before delivering the final numerical blow. A single river barge carries the equivalent cargo of 70 individual semi-trucks. By shifting your primary transport arteries from the asphalt to the water, my firm will reduce your annual fuel expenditures by 20%. Furthermore, we bypass the highway gridlock entirely, ensuring a predictable, stable supply chain regardless of weather or traffic conditions. The executives sat in stunned silence. The sheer logistical elegance of the barge system, coupled with the undeniable mathematical savings, rendered every other proposal obsolete. The chairman of the board, a grizzled veteran of the timber industry, leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at the projected map and then looked at me, a profound respect replacing his initial skepticism. "You coded this mapping system yourself?" he asked. I confirmed that I had. The vote was unanimous. When the chairman walked out to the lobby to announce the decision, Jim was still loitering near the elevator, expecting to claim his victory. The moment the chairman shook my hand and awarded the lucrative contract to Hughes Logistics, the arrogant grin melted right off Jim's face. He stood there speechless, his imposing frame suddenly looking incredibly fragile. A few of the younger executives failed to suppress their laughter, watching the reigning heavyweight of the Delta get dismantled by a woman he had dismissed as a housewife. Jim tucked his chin and walked out the glass doors, humiliated and permanently dethroned. Securing the timber cooperative injected immense capital into my firm. I moved out of the cinderblock office and leased a proper commercial suite with wide windows overlooking the city. I hired a small dedicated staff consisting of sharp analytical minds who valued operational efficiency over traditional networking. We worked long, grueling hours, optimizing freight lines across 3 different states. My reputation transformed from an unknown entity into a formidable regional power. While I was busy acquiring genuine operational leverage, Derek and Valerie were dedicating their existence to cultivating a lavish, superficial social image. I occasionally saw their photographs in local society magazines, attending charity galas and country club luncheons. Valerie curated a flawless digital presence, projecting the illusion of infinite wealth and perfect marital bliss. Derek wore his custom suits and smiled for the cameras, desperately clinging to the prestigious corporate persona he valued above all else. They were entirely focused on the aesthetic surface of success, while I was quietly constructing the subterranean infrastructure of a real empire. My days settled into a productive, intense rhythm. I believed my past was finally severed, and my future was secure. However, the universe has a distinct way of testing our boundaries just when we feel safe. I was reviewing a freight manifest late one Thursday afternoon when my secure office line rang. The caller identification displayed the name of a highly prestigious commercial bank located in the heart of Little Rock. I picked up the receiver, expecting a routine inquiry regarding a local agricultural loan. Instead, the stern voice of a senior banking official presented a confidential assignment that would drag me directly back into the toxic orbit of the people who broke my heart. They needed an objective auditor to dissect the failing financials of a mysterious shell company and I had no idea the scalpel they were handing me was hovering right over my ex-husband's throat. 2 full years had evaporated since I secured the timber cooperative contract. My consulting firm now occupied a pristine corner suite on the 4th floor of a glass building overlooking the Arkansas River. The frantic hustle of my early days had morphed into a steady rhythm of corporate dominance. The phone call from a senior banking official disrupted that predictable cadence. His name was Arthur Sterling, representing the foremost commercial lending institution in Little Rock. Sterling did not mince words. He spoke with the clipped, precise cadence of a man who measured his life in interest rates and risk assessments. His institution held a substantial loan portfolio for a regional retail and logistics umbrella called Delta Holdings Group. The entity was flagging for severe default. Sterling wanted my enterprise to conduct a ruthless, objective third-party audit. He needed to know if the holding company possessed any salvageable operational value, or if the lenders should initiate immediate liquidation proceedings. I accepted the assignment. The following morning, a bonded courier pushed through my double doors, carrying a heavy steel lockbox. He required 3 separate signatures before releasing the container. Inside rested a stack of encrypted hard drives alongside bound physical ledgers. I carried the metal box into my private office, locked the door, and drew the blinds. The room fell into a quiet, dim hush, illuminated only by the cool glow of my dual monitors. The air smelled faintly of fresh ink and ozone. I plugged the first drive into my secure terminal and entered the complex decryption cipher Sterling had provided. Folders unfurled across my screen. Spreadsheets cascaded in endless rows displaying stark, black and red data. My eyes scanned the digital columns, searching for the foundational structural flaws that cause a business to fracture. I started cross-referencing the vendor payments, attempting to trace the origin of the capital injections, keeping the dying company afloat. I clicked on a master routing file to verify a recurring wire transfer. The screen populated with a physical billing address. The air left my lungs. My fingers froze suspended rigidly over the mechanical keyboard. A sudden chill radiated from the base of my neck, tracing a slow path down my spine. I knew that exact address. I had mailed countless dry cleaning receipts, signed birthday cards, and dispatched emergency lunches to that specific location for decades. It was the central administrative hub for Derek and his manufacturing plant. I pulled the foundational incorporation documents from the physical lockbox, dragging the heavy parchment onto my desk. I flipped through the dense legal jargon until I reached the final signature page. There it was printed, in undeniable black ink. Delta Holdings Group was the corporate umbrella shielding Valerie and her upscale home goods boutique. Derek was listed as the primary financial guarantor. The prestigious lending institution had unknowingly handed me the keys to the empire built upon the ashes of my destroyed marriage. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitors. The financial reality of their shared enterprise was catastrophic. They were drowning in a staggering ocean of debt. The ledgers painted a chaotic picture of reckless spending hidden behind convoluted shell transfers and delayed vendor payouts. The boutique was bleeding capital at a terminal velocity. My analytical mind immediately began constructing a narrative based on 20 years of intimate historical data. During our marriage, Derek wielded money like a blunt, heavy weapon. He monitored our household budget down to the final cent. I remembered a freezing Tuesday evening when he interrogated me for an hour over a $12 discrepancy in our winter heating bill. He demanded itemized receipts for everyday grocery purchases while simultaneously buying bespoke Italian suits for himself without a second thought. He was a ruthless tyrant regarding cash flow and localized control. Seeing this level of unmitigated financial ruin under his name did not align with his rigid habits. A man that obsessed with preserving his own wealth does not simply allow a business to bleed dry through mere incompetence. I stared at a specific column tracking the internal movement of funds. I surmised he was the calculated mastermind, deliberately stripping the retail shell company of its liquid assets. It made perfect cynical sense. Derek always ensured his own survival, regardless of the collateral damage inflicted upon the people around him. He was likely funneling the borrowed capital into a hidden offshore account, preparing to cut his losses and leave the lenders holding an empty bag. He would let the boutique file for corporate bankruptcy and walk away with his personal wealth safely shielded behind a labyrinth of legal loopholes. He was pulling a fast one, orchestrating the downfall of his new wife just to line his own pockets. I picked up a silver pen, rolling the cool metal between my palms. The tactile sensation grounded me in the present moment. The power dynamic had shifted with dizzying, terrifying speed. 3 years ago, I was discarded in a cramped duplex, lacking the basic financial means to fight back against his expensive legal team. I was a ghost, haunting the periphery of their lavish societal debut. Now I sat at the apex of a flourishing logistics enterprise, holding a digital scalpel hovering directly over their exposed jugular. A single clinical report generated from my desk would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. The lending institution would seize their assets, foreclose on their properties, and end their opulent charade forever. I possessed the undeniable authority to recommend immediate liquidation. I could watch the gavel fall on their grand illusion. Alternatively, if I dug deep enough into the operational weeds, I might find a legitimate restructuring path to salvage their failing business and protect the loan. I held the scalpel that could either save them or let them bleed out on the corporate operating table. My heart hammered a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. The universe had delivered the ultimate test of my professional integrity. Submitting a report tainted by personal vengeance would violate the core principles I had utilized to build my own success. I could not allow the ghosts of my past to dictate the quality of my work. I had to remain entirely objective. I needed to dissect their failure using nothing but raw, empirical data. I dropped the silver pen onto the desk and leaned closer to the glowing screens. To construct an unassailable audit, I needed to follow the money down to the microscopic level. I needed to open the raw, fragmented supplier invoices Valerie had submitted to the holding company. I prepared to trace every single dollar flowing out of the boutique, determining exactly how Derek was orchestrating his phantom heist. The deeper I went into the digital ledger, the closer I would get to the fatal flaw hidden beneath their flawless public facade. The sun set over the Arkansas River, painting the water in bruised hues of purple and orange. Inside my corner suite, the only illumination came from the stark white glare of my dual monitors. I sat perfectly still, my eyes scanning the endless rows of digitized vendor invoices provided by the commercial bank. I had promised Arthur Sterling a ruthless, objective audit of Delta Holdings Group, and I intended to deliver exactly that. I pushed aside the memories of my shattered marriage, isolating my analytical mind from the emotional wreckage Derek and Valerie had caused. I was a surgeon, examining a terminal patient. The personal history connecting us held absolutely no relevance on the operating table. The financial landscape of Valerie and her upscale boutique was a catastrophic disaster wrapped in expensive packaging. The ledgers revealed a profound prioritization of aesthetic appeal over fundamental economic reality. She had signed commercial leases for prime retail spaces in the most heavily foot-trafficked affluent districts of Little Rock. The overhead costs for rent alone consumed 60% of her gross revenue before a single customer even walked through the heavy glass doors. But the true fatal flaw resided deeper within the operational infrastructure. Valerie lacked the rudimentary understanding of supply chain logistics. She operated a retail business like a vanity project, curating an immaculate showroom, while completely ignoring the chaotic hemorrhage occurring in her back rooms. I opened the warehouse manifests, cross-referencing the digital stock reports with the corresponding shipping invoices. The data painted a picture of pure, unadulterated operational negligence. Her storage facilities were overflowing with dead seasonal inventory. I isolated a specific recurring expenditure that highlighted her gross incompetence. 9 months ago, she had ordered a massive shipment of imported luxury candles from a boutique artisan in southern France. She demanded expedited international air freight to ensure the products arrived in time for a specialized holiday launch party. The air freight charges were absolutely exorbitant, costing 10 times the price of standard maritime shipping. The tragedy of that lavish expenditure became glaringly apparent on the sales ledger. The holiday launch party came and went. The luxury candles, priced at an absurd markup, failed to attract the local consumer base. Instead of aggressively marking down the inventory to recoup the initial capital, Valerie simply shoved the unsold merchandise into a climate-controlled storage unit. Those expensive imported candles had been sitting in a rented facility for 3 fiscal quarters, accumulating monthly storage fees while gathering dust. This single miscalculation was repeated across dozens of product lines. She hoarded unsold decorative pillows, discontinued seasonal ceramics, and overpriced imported linens. The business was choking to death on its own stagnant excess. The boutique was undeniably insolvent. The incoming revenue barely covered the interest on the massive commercial loans, let alone the operational overhead. Yet Delta Holdings Group had miraculously managed to avoid a hard default for 18 months. Something was keeping the artificial life support machine plugged in. I returned my focus to the mysterious capital injections. I had initially assumed Derek was acting as a calculated mastermind, intentionally bleeding the retail shell company to enrich his own hidden offshore accounts. I believed he was orchestrating a complex financial heist. I was completely wrong. As I traced the exact routing numbers attached to the incoming emergency wire transfers, the truth crystallized on my glowing screen. Derek was not executing a brilliant heist. He was drowning in a frantic, desperate shell game. The wire transfers were not originating from a personal savings account or a legitimate investment fund. The money was being quietly funneled directly from the operating budget of his own manufacturing plant. My breath hitched in my throat. I leaned closer to the monitor, verifying the routing digits 3 separate times. The reality was undeniable. Derek was actively embezzling corporate capital from his employers to cover Valerie and her missed loan payments. He was siphoning funds intended for industrial machinery maintenance and employee payroll, using the cash to plug the massive holes in his new wife and her failing retail vanity project. This was not a simple misallocation of funds. This was a severe, catastrophic violation of his corporate bylaws. It was a federal financial crime. The man who used to terrorize me over a $12 heating bill was now risking federal prison time to maintain the illusion of success. He was trapped. Valerie possessed an insatiable appetite for societal validation, and Derek lacked the courage to deny her. He could not admit to his country club peers that his new, glamorous marriage was a financial disaster. Instead of forcing Valerie to liquidate the boutique and accept a public failure, he chose to commit corporate fraud. He was desperately moving money around the board, hoping a sudden, miraculous spike in retail sales would allow him to secretly repay the stolen manufacturing funds before the annual corporate audit exposed his embezzlement. Their timeline was rapidly collapsing. The digital ledgers indicated that the manufacturing plant was approaching its own fiscal quarter close. Derek could no longer siphon funds without triggering alarms from his own board of directors. The boutique was scheduled for another massive commercial loan repayment in exactly 3 weeks. They had completely exhausted their stolen capital. If they missed this upcoming quarter, the bank would not just seize the retail store. The cross-collateralization clauses in the original loan documents meant Arthur Sterling and his lending institution would legally seize Derek and his personal assets. They would take the sprawling suburban brick house. They would seize the luxury vehicles. They would liquidate the primary investment portfolios. Derek and Valerie were standing on the edge of absolute total ruin. The universe had handed me a loaded weapon with the safety disengaged. I sat in my quiet office holding the undeniable mathematical proof required to obliterate the people who had destroyed my family. A single phone call to Arthur Sterling detailing the origin of the capital injections would trigger immediate foreclosure. A subsequent anonymous tip to the manufacturing plant board of directors would guarantee Derek faced immediate termination and severe criminal prosecution. I possessed the power to shatter their flawless public facade and watch them tumble into the dirt. The temptation was a dark, heavy weight pressing against my chest. A deep, primal part of my soul yearned to twist the knife. I wanted Derek to feel the exact same isolating terror he inflicted upon me when he left me stranded in that rented duplex. I wanted Valerie to experience the sheer humiliation of having her designer lifestyle repossessed in front of her judgmental peers. I closed my eyes, letting the sweet, intoxicating fantasy of pure vengeance wash over my mind. But the fantasy tasted remarkably like poison. I opened my eyes and looked around my pristine office. I looked at the framed corporate charter hanging on my wall. Hugh's supply chain and logistics was built on a foundation of unyielding integrity, absolute precision, and raw empirical truth. I had spent 2 grueling years clawing my way out of the darkness, relying on my intellect and my strategic discipline. If I used my company letterhead to execute a personal vendetta, I would fundamentally compromise the exact principles that saved my life. I would become just as corrupt and hollow as the man I used to call my husband. I refused to let Derek strip me of my professional honor. I engaged my keyboard and began drafting the official audit report. My analysis was completely devoid of emotion. It was cold, clinical, and devastatingly accurate. I documented the exorbitant commercial lease agreements. I detailed the suffocating weight of the dead seasonal inventory, highlighting the luxury candle fiasco as a prime indicator of gross operational negligence. I constructed precise financial models, demonstrating the terminal trajectory of the retail enterprise. I concluded the comprehensive document with a firm, undeniable recommendation. Delta Holdings Group possessed zero salvageable operational value. The business model was fundamentally broken, and the management demonstrated a profound inability to rectify the supply chain hemorrhage. I advised the lending institution to deny any further credit extensions and initiate immediate liquidation protocols to protect the remaining loan principal. However, I deliberately omitted the specific origin of the emergency capital injections. I stated that the business was relying on unsustainable external cash infusions, but I did not name the manufacturing plant. Arthur Sterling did not hire me to conduct a criminal investigation into Derek and his employer. He hired me to evaluate the viability of the retail boutique. I provided the exact professional service requested, protecting my firm integrity while delivering a mathematically unassailable death sentence to the holding company. I hit the print command. The heavy laser printer hummed, spitting out 40 pages of dense, undeniable financial reality. I bound the report in a professional dark leather folder, placing it squarely in the center of my desk. The trap was fully constructed using their own terrible decisions as the binding mechanism. I picked up my office telephone to inform the bank that the audit was complete. I expected a brief congratulatory response and a request to send a courier. Instead, Arthur Sterling answered the line with a sharp, urgent tone, demanding a highly unusual next step. He did not just want the physical document delivered to his desk. He required me to present these devastating findings in person at a mandatory closed-door meeting tomorrow morning, standing directly across the boardroom table from the terrified guarantors themselves. The days preceding the mandatory banking presentation moved with an agonizingly slow rhythm. I spent those final 72 hours meticulously preparing my visual displays, ensuring every single data point was completely unassailable. The weight of the impending confrontation settled heavily over my shoulders, but it was not the familiar, suffocating burden of martial subjugation. It was the bracing, heavy armor of a warrior preparing for a definitive battle. I had deliberately kept my involvement with the Delta Holdings audit entirely confidential, assuming the commercial lenders would maintain standard corporate discretion until the official summit. However, I severely underestimated the porous nature of the Little Rock financial sector. A localized ecosystem built on country club gossip and backroom favors rarely keeps a secret for long. Exactly 1 week before the scheduled boardroom meeting, the fragile seal of confidentiality broke. I stayed late at the office, finalizing the digital presentation slides. The sun had completely vanished, leaving the city bathed in the harsh, artificial glow of street lamps. I locked the heavy glass double doors of my suite and took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. The concrete structure was desolate and quiet, echoing only with the rhythmic clicking of my steel-toe boots against the pavement. The air felt uncomfortably humid, carrying the distinct metallic scent of car exhaust and damp concrete. As I approached my parked sedan, a sudden movement caught my peripheral vision. A tall figure stepped out from the deep shadows cast by a concrete support pillar, deliberately blocking my path to the driver's side door. My heart executed a single, violent thud against my ribs before my trained analytical discipline instantly engaged. I stopped walking, maintaining a safe physical distance. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed loudly, illuminating the hostile intruder. It was Derek. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit, but the pristine aesthetic was failing to mask the frantic unspooling occurring beneath the fabric. His tie was loosened, his jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles twitched near his temples. He radiated a toxic, suffocating blend of arrogant entitlement and poorly concealed panic. Someone at the bank had clearly leaked the identity of the lead auditor assigned to dissect his failing retail empire. He closed the remaining distance between us, stepping aggressively into my personal space. This was a classic physical intimidation tactic he had utilized countless times during our marriage. He would use his height and his broad shoulders to physically box me into a corner, forcing me to shrink downward and accept his verbal barrage. 3 years ago, my immediate physical response would have been to lower my gaze, apologize for some perceived slight, and retreat. Tonight I did not flinch. I did not step backward. I stood perfectly still, locking my eyes directly onto his face. "What are you playing at, Tina?" he demanded, his voice echoing harshly through the empty garage. He did not bother with a polite greeting. He immediately defaulted to the condescending tone of a disappointed parent scolding a disobedient child. "I'm not playing anything, Derek," I replied, keeping my vocal register completely flat and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "I am operating a logistics firm and finishing a commissioned financial evaluation. You need to step away from my vehicle." He let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "You really think you have tricked these banking executives into believing you are a legitimate consultant? I know the truth. You are just a bored, vindictive ex-wife trying to manufacture a pathetic revenge scheme." I received a phone call from an associate at the lending firm today. "They told me you are heading the restructuring audit for Valerie and her boutique." He leaned closer, pointing a rigid, aggressive finger directly at my chest. He was operating under a massive informational deficit. Derek believed his elaborate financial shell game was entirely successful. He assumed the bank was merely conducting a routine quarterly checkup. He had absolutely no idea that I had uncovered the catastrophic depth of their insolvency or the massive piles of dead inventory choking their warehouses. More importantly, he wrongly assumed I was entirely ignorant regarding his illegal embezzlement. He thought his only exposure was a minor commingling of personal assets, which he could easily explain away to a sympathetic loan officer. "You are going to call Arthur Sterling tomorrow morning," he ordered, dictating his demands with supreme unearned authority. You are going to formally recuse yourself from this assignment, citing a massive conflict of interest. Then, you are going to hand over all the encrypted files you received and bury whatever amateur report you tried to write. I tilted my head, studying the desperate man standing before me. The illusion of his omnipotent power had completely evaporated. I saw him with brutal, total clarity. He was a small, fragile tyrant, relying on volume and physical posturing to mask his severe incompetence. "And if I decline your generous suggestion," I asked, my voice remaining remarkably calm. His face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. The anger boiled over, erasing his carefully curated corporate charm. "If you do not comply, I will personally dismantle this little hobby business you have built. I know every major player in the Arkansas supply chain sector. I will call the timber cooperative. I will call the agricultural vendors. I will tell them you are emotionally unstable and utilizing stolen proprietary data to fake your logistical models. I will tie you up in civil litigation for the next decade until you are completely bankrupt and crawling back to that pathetic rented duplex. Do you understand me?" He waited for the desired effect. He expected the tears to form. He expected my shoulders to slump. He waited for the broken, subservient woman to apologize and surrender. I looked him dead in the eye, completely unfurling the heavy, imposing weight of my own earned power. "You severely overestimate your current leverage, Derek," I stated, slicing through his bluster with absolute surgical precision. "You are standing in this damp garage making empty threats because you are terrified. You are terrified because you know your new wife is drowning in commercial debt and you cannot afford to finance her vanity project any longer." His mouth opened to issue a sharp denial, but I did not afford him the oxygen to speak. "Do not interrupt me," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a lethal, freezing authority that visibly stunned him. "You demand that I recuse myself to protect your reputation? You assume my analysis is amateur. Let me correct your flawed assumptions. My data is verified. My empirical findings are unassailable. I have traced every single mismanaged dollar flowing out of that retail holding company." I took a single, deliberate step forward, closing the gap and forcing him to instinctively retreat a fraction of an inch. I was no longer the prey, but the most fascinating discovery I made during my research was tracing the incoming funds. I continued speaking slowly, ensuring every single word landed with devastating impact. "Valerie has missed 3 consecutive loan payments, yet the holding company avoided default because a sudden influx of capital materialized from an external source." I traced the routing numbers attached to those emergency wire transfers, Derek. "They originate directly from the operating budget of your manufacturing plant." The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale hue. The aggressive, rigid posture completely collapsed. His jaw literally slacked, hanging slightly open as the catastrophic reality of my statement hit his nervous system. "You are actively embezzling corporate capital from your employers to plug the holes in a sinking retail ship," I said, delivering the fatal blow without a single ounce of pity. "That is a severe violation of your corporate bylaws. It is a federal offense." He stammered, attempting to formulate a cohesive sentence, but his brain was short-circuiting. The bully suddenly realized he no longer possessed a victim to push around. He was looking at a formidable adversary, holding a loaded gun directly to his career. "If you ever approach me in a dark parking lot again," I warned, my gaze boring into his terrified eyes, "I will not wait for the scheduled banking presentation. I will immediately send my unedited financial findings directly to the board of directors at your manufacturing plant. I will expose your unauthorized fund transfers tomorrow morning. You will be terminated before lunch and facing criminal indictment by sunset. Now step aside and let me enter my vehicle." Derek did not say another word. He was physically incapable of speech. He slowly stepped backward, retreating into the shadows of the concrete pillar. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the tyrant who had discarded me 3 years ago. I unlocked my sedan, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not look back as I drove out of the subterranean garage, leaving him alone in the damp darkness. The confrontation was a monumental victory, but it birthed a dangerous new complication. By showing my hand and revealing my knowledge of his embezzlement, I had backed a desperate, narcissistic man into a corner. Derek now knew that his entire existence was resting on the edge of a blade. A cornered animal is incredibly unpredictable. He had exactly 7 days to formulate a countermeasure before the boardroom summit. I knew he would not simply accept his execution quietly. He would try to rig the impending meeting, preparing one final explosive sabotage to discredit my audit and save his empire. The real war was about to begin inside that Little Rock conference room. The psychological unraveling of an exposed narcissist is a fascinating process to observe from a safe distance. Following our confrontation in the subterranean parking structure, Derek drove back to his sprawling suburban estate in a state of absolute terror. He realized his bullying tactics were completely useless against the woman I had become. Faced with the impending destruction of his career, he confessed the entire parking garage encounter to his new wife. He told Valerie that her retail holding company was being audited by the exact woman they had betrayed 3 years ago. Valerie did not possess the intellectual capacity to challenge my financial mathematics. She lacked the fundamental business acumen to argue supply chain logistics or debt-to-income ratios. However, she possessed a different type of weapon. Throughout her entire life, she had navigated the world relying strictly on social currency and interpersonal manipulation. She was a master of the whisper network. When faced with a corporate threat, she instinctively reverted to the exact same high school deflection tactics she had perfected decades earlier. She launched a vicious preemptive strike designed to completely assassinate my professional character. Valerie utilized her exclusive membership at the most prestigious country club in Little Rock to deploy her narrative. She spent the next 3 days attending charity luncheons, tennis matches, and cocktail hours, weaving a fabricated story of victimization. She sat across from prominent local business owners, sipping expensive champagne and painting a pathetic picture of a scorned, unhinged ex-wife. She claimed I was obsessed with her marriage. She told the affluent community that I was a bitter, jealous woman who had somehow manipulated my way into a banking contract solely to forge financial documents and destroy her retail boutique out of pure spite. She knew the commercial lenders at the bank moved within those exact same elite social circles. Her strategy was incredibly transparent, but undeniably dangerous. She intended to drag my name into the mud, hoping the toxic gossip would reach the boardroom before I delivered my final presentation. If the lending executives believed I harbored a personal vendetta, they would immediately question the objectivity of my audit. They would dismiss my devastating findings as fabricated revenge, thereby saving her boutique from immediate foreclosure. The malicious rumors spread through the Arkansas business community like a sudden wildfire in dry brush. I remained entirely focused on finalizing my datasets, oblivious to the invisible poison seeping into my professional ecosystem, until the damage nearly derailed a massive expansion for my firm. My logistics enterprise was currently positioned as the primary frontrunner for a highly lucrative municipal contract. The county government was seeking a private firm to completely overhaul the supply chain for their public works department. The project involved routing heavy infrastructure materials, road maintenance equipment, and disaster relief supplies across the entire state. Securing this government bid would elevate my company from a successful regional player into a statewide powerhouse. I sat in my corner office, watching the river flow beyond the glass, when my secure phone line rang. The caller was a senior county commissioner who had previously expressed immense enthusiasm for my logistical proposals. Today, his tone was noticeably strained and uncomfortably formal. He cleared his throat nervously before addressing the issue. He informed me that the Municipal Selection Committee was suddenly pausing their final decision regarding the public works contract. He cited deeply concerning allegations circulating among the local Chamber of Commerce. He reluctantly admitted that prominent voices in the community were questioning my ethical standards. The phrase conflict of interest was deployed heavily. He told me the county could not risk awarding a multi-million-dollar infrastructure project to a consultant accused of fabricating data to execute a personal vendetta. The phone call ended, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in my office. A familiar, chilling sensation crept up my spine. 3 years ago, Valerie had stolen my husband and effectively erased my standing in our social circle. Now she was attempting to steal my future by poisoning the professional reputation I had built with my own bare hands. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was staggering. She genuinely believed her country club whispers could dismantle my corporate reality. A wave of intense anger washed over me. The instinct to retaliate was primal and fierce. I wanted to march into her lavish boutique and confront her publicly. I wanted to draft a press release exposing her profound incompetence and unauthorized fund transfers. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, forcing the emotional surge back down into the dark corners of my mind. I was no longer a discarded housewife fighting over social scraps. I was the principal operator of a premier logistics firm. I was operating on a corporate battlefield, and successful commanders do not abandon their strategic high ground to wrestle in the mud with a desperate opponent. Engaging in a public shouting match would only validate her narrative, painting us both as hysterical women fighting over a man. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I walked out of my private office and stood in the center of the bustling bullpen. I called for an immediate emergency meeting, summoning my team of specialized analysts into the main conference room. My staff took their seats around the long oak table, opening their laptops and waiting for my instruction. A few of them had already heard the vicious rumors circulating through the local industry channels. My lead data architect, a sharp young man who had previously worked for a national accounting firm, looked visibly furious on my behalf. He suggested we contact a corporate defamation attorney to issue immediate cease and desist letters to Valerie and her social associates. He wanted to threaten civil lawsuits to silence the Whisper campaign. I shook my head, vetoing the legal counterattack instantly. Lawsuits take years to litigate, I explained, pacing slowly at the head of the table. We do not have years. We have exactly 4 days before I present the holding company audit to the commercial lenders. Valerie is spreading these lies because she is cornered. She wants us to panic. She wants us to waste our time and energy defending my character instead of verifying her financial ruin. We will not take the bait. We will completely ignore the noise. I projected the digital folders containing the retail boutique ledgers onto the large presentation screen on the wall. The only defense against a coordinated character assassination is absolute, irrefutable, concrete evidence, I continued. We are going to make our data so dense and mathematically perfect that no amount of country club gossip could possibly dispute it. I instructed my team to pivot their focus away from the broad operational overhead and drill directly down into the microscopic accounting details. Valerie had provided the bank with hundreds of fragmented, scattered supplier invoices to justify her massive commercial loan requests. These documents were disorganized, poorly categorized, and visually chaotic. I had previously recognized her inventory management was wildly incompetent, but I needed something much stronger than incompetence to silence the incoming storm. Tear these fragmented invoices apart, I commanded, pointing to the screen. Do not just look at the total expenditures. Look at the vendor identification numbers. Look at the shipping origins. Cross-reference every single piece of paper she submitted with the regional freight manifests. Find the exact physical location of every product she claims to have purchased. My team nodded, their fingers flying across their keyboards as they launched into the deep dive. The conference room transformed into a quiet, humming engine of raw analytical power. We ordered dinner to the office, working late into the night beneath the bright fluorescent lights. The malicious gossip circulating through the wealthy neighborhoods of Little Rock felt entirely irrelevant inside that room. We were armed with algorithms, spreadsheets, and an unyielding commitment to the truth. As the hours ticked past midnight, the disorganized puzzle pieces of Valerie and her lavish retail operation began to align. I stood behind my lead data architect, watching his screen as he ran a complex cross-referencing program against the fragmented billing statements. We expected to find more overpriced candles, more dead seasonal inventory, and more proof of her staggering business ignorance. Instead, the software flagged a bizarre, repetitive anomaly hidden deep within the purchasing ledgers. A pattern began to emerge that fundamentally altered the entire trajectory of the audit. Valerie had assumed her whisper campaign would successfully distract me from looking closer. Her desperate high school deflection tactic achieved the exact opposite result. By forcing my firm to scrutinize the microscopic details of her financial records, we were about to uncover a secret so legally radioactive it would guarantee her total destruction. The digital clock mounted on the frosted glass wall of my conference room clicked silently toward 3 in the morning. My specialized team of logistical analysts was running entirely on residual adrenaline and lukewarm black coffee. The harsh fluorescent glow of our dual monitors illuminated their exhausted features, but nobody asked permission to go home. We were actively hunting an invisible predator, hiding within a vast, limitless ocean of numeric data. We had spent the last 14 hours dissecting the fragmented, chaotic billing statements provided by the commercial lending institution. My lead data architect, a brilliant young man who possessed a relentless, obsessive attention to detail, rubbed his bloodshot eyes and tapped his screen. He waved me over to his workstation, pointing a trembling finger at a specific cluster of digital spreadsheets. He had successfully isolated a recurring series of international shipping invoices submitted by the retail holding company. The documents claimed a staggering expenditure for luxury home goods imported directly from the European continent. I leaned heavily over his shoulder, studying the complex digital ledger. The destination invoices were intricately coded for expensive artisan candles, heavy woven textiles, and bespoke ceramics, allegedly shipped from a premium vendor located in Milan. A sharp, distinct memory flared in my mind, cutting through my profound exhaustion. 3 years had evaporated since that fateful afternoon at the Little Rock Promenade, but I clearly remembered the exact conversation I overheard right before I handed my ex-husband my business card. My former best friend had been complaining loudly into her cellular phone about a severe, unacceptable shipping delay from Milan. She deliberately used that exotic international location to project a false aura of high fashion and exclusive wealth to anyone listening nearby. She wanted the pedestrians in the shopping mall to believe she was a cosmopolitan mogul managing a global empire. I instructed my data architect to immediately pull the corresponding maritime and air freight manifests for those specific dates. As a premier logistics firm, we possessed direct access to global customs databases. We needed to track the physical cargo containers through international ports to verify the delay. He ran the complex routing numbers through the global commercial database, executing a search query that scanned international bills of lading and domestic port authority weigh stations. The software processed the request for several tense seconds before returning an absolute, categorical void. There were no cargo containers registered to that holding company. There were no international customs declarations filed in Italy or the United States. There were no tracking weights recorded by any domestic transit authority. The luxurious shipments from Milan did not experience a weather delay or a minor logistical bottleneck. The shipments simply did not exist anywhere in the physical world. My former friend had deliberately submitted highly detailed, forged invoices to the commercial lending institution requesting millions of dollars to pay for physical retail inventory that was entirely fabricated. I pulled up a leather ergonomic chair sitting directly beside my lead architect. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. I commanded him to trace the destination accounts where the bank had wired the loan money to pay for these phantom imported goods. We needed to follow the digital breadcrumbs to the absolute end of the trail. The funds did not travel to an artisan candle maker in southern France or a specialized textile manufacturer in Italy. The capital was routed through a complex, sophisticated series of domestic proxy accounts designed to deliberately obscure the origin. After bouncing through 3 separate states, the massive wire transfers terminated in a private offshore holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. She had meticulously constructed an untraceable shadow corporation. She was not just a terrible, incompetent business owner failing to manage a retail supply chain. She was actively orchestrating a massive, highly sophisticated federal wire fraud operation right under the noses of the most powerful bankers in Arkansas. My pulse quickened as the true scale of her deception materialized on the glowing monitors. I ordered a complete, immediate reconciliation of the incoming emergency capital that had been keeping the failing retail store artificially afloat. Earlier in my investigation, I had discovered that my ex-husband was illegally transferring funds from his own manufacturing plant to prevent the boutique from defaulting on its commercial loans. I had operated under the entirely logical assumption that he was the controlling mastermind attempting to salvage his new marriage while hiding his desperate illegal actions. The newly cross-referenced data completely shattered that assumption into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The man who had spent 20 years controlling every single penny of my household budget was not the apex predator in this scenario. He was the clueless, unsuspecting Mark. The woman who destroyed my marriage was intentionally bleeding her own retail boutique dry. Her strategy was breathtakingly malicious. She would request massive commercial loans from the bank, citing the urgent need to purchase expensive luxury inventory for upcoming seasonal sales. When the loan money arrived, she funneled it directly into her untraceable offshore account using the phantom Milan invoices as a brilliant legal cover. As the retail store inevitably ran out of operating cash to pay rent and employee salaries, she would cry to her new husband, claiming she desperately needed emergency financial help. Blinded by his own immense arrogance and his desperate need to maintain their wealthy societal facade, he would quietly siphon money from his manufacturing plant to cover her immediate deficits. He genuinely thought he was saving her business and protecting their public image. In reality, he was simply refilling the trough so she could continue stealing. She was stealing the bank funds, and she was systematically draining his corporate accounts simultaneously. The sheer sociopathic brilliance of her exit strategy left me momentarily breathless, staring at the illuminated spreadsheets. She knew the retail boutique was a sinking ship taking on water faster than it could be bailed out. She knew the commercial lenders would eventually demand a full forensic accounting of their missing capital. She also recognized that her husband had deeply, irrevocably compromised himself by moving unauthorized funds from his employers. She was actively preparing her own golden parachute. When the federal financial authorities finally arrived to investigate the ruined holding company, they would find him completely covered in the digital evidence of corporate embezzlement. He would take the catastrophic financial and legal fall, going to federal prison for corporate fraud, while she planned to quietly escape to an island jurisdiction with millions of dollars in untraceable stolen cash. She was going to leave him completely destroyed, exactly as they had both left me stranded in that rented duplex 3 years ago. Proving this massive criminal conspiracy required significantly more than just digital routing numbers and missing cargo containers. I needed undeniable physical evidence connecting the orchestrator directly to the phantom offshore accounts. The lending institution required a physical authorizing signature to release the massive international wire transfers. A bank does not simply send millions of dollars across international borders without a legally binding authorization document signed by the principal guarantor. I told my data architect to bypass the standard numerical spreadsheets and open the raw scanned portable document formats containing the original authorization forms submitted to the loan officers. The high-resolution image loaded slowly onto the large presentation screen dominating the center of the dark conference room. I stood up and walked closer to the glowing display, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I reached the bottom right corner of the document, where the principal guarantor was required to sign. My breath caught sharply in my throat, and a cold wave of absolute realization washed over my entire body. The dark ink displayed a highly distinct, overly flourished cursive handwriting. The most damning, undeniable detail was the specific artistic execution hovering directly over the lowercase letter I. Instead of utilizing a standard dot, the author had deliberately drawn a perfectly symmetric small looping heart. I recognized that exact arrogant signature. It was burned into my memory with agonizing, permanent clarity. It was the identical handwriting I had discovered on the misfiled commercial lease document hidden inside a home office desk 3 years ago. That initial signature had shattered my 20-year marriage, destroyed my family, and forced me into a brutal life of desperate survival. Now that exact same childish, loopy heart sat at the bottom of a fraudulent wire transfer document legally authorizing the theft of millions of dollars. The poetic justice of the moment was overwhelmingly beautiful. She had used her distinct signature to steal my husband, and now she had used that identical signature to forge a federal crime that would guarantee her total, absolute destruction. The universe had delivered the instrument of her demise, using the exact same weapon she used to break my heart. I instructed my dedicated team to print every single document invoice and signature match we had uncovered during the long, grueling night. We compiled the radioactive evidence into a thick, impenetrable black binder. The vicious whisper campaign my former friend had launched through the wealthy country club circuit felt utterly pathetic compared to the devastating nuclear arsenal currently sitting on my conference table. She genuinely believed her high school gossip tactics were successfully tearing down my reputation in the business community. She thought she had won the psychological war, manipulating the local executives into doubting my professional integrity and halting my municipal contracts. She had absolutely no idea that her petty, desperate distractions had only sharpened my intense focus, leading me directly to the undeniable physical proof of her impending imprisonment. The sun began to rise over the Arkansas Delta, casting a warm, golden light through my expansive office windows. I dismissed my exhausted team, telling them to go home and get some well-deserved rest before the day began. I stood alone in the quiet suite, holding the heavy black binder firmly against my chest. Tomorrow morning, I was scheduled to walk into the executive boardroom at the commercial lending institution. I was scheduled to sit directly across the long mahogany table from my ex-husband, his fraudulent wife, and the senior banking officials who controlled their fate. She would undoubtedly arrive wearing an expensive designer dress, sporting a smug, victorious smile, completely confident that her character assassination had successfully neutralized my audit. She fully expected me to cower defensively and beg the sophisticated bankers to believe my basic mathematical models. I closed my eyes, feeling a profound, cold strength settle deep into my bones. I was not going to waste a single breath defending my character tomorrow. I was going to execute a flawless corporate execution, and the devastating bloodbath would begin the exact second I opened that black binder. The glass walls of the executive boardroom on the 50th floor offered an expansive, breathtaking view of the Arkansas River winding slowly through the delta. I arrived 20 minutes early, arranging my digital tablets and placing the heavy black binder exactly parallel to the edge of the polished oak table. Arthur Sterling entered shortly after, accompanied by his lead fraud investigator, a silent, imposing man wearing a drab gray suit. They took their seats, exuding the cold, detached authority of men who dismantle corporations before their morning coffee. I stood at the head of the table, smoothing the front of my tailored blazer, preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. The heavy double doors swung open, allowing Derek and Valerie to enter the arena. My former best friend walked into the commercial lending tribunal as if she were gracing the red carpet at a charity gala. She wore an immaculate pearl-white designer dress that easily cost $5,000, completing the ensemble with a matching quilted leather handbag. Her posture radiated an extreme, almost dizzying level of smugness. She took her seat directly across from me, flashing a sharp, predatory smile. She genuinely believed her malicious country club whisper campaign had completely discredited my professional reputation. She thought she had successfully manipulated these senior banking officials into viewing me as a hysterical, vindictive ex-wife, fabricating numbers out of pure jealousy. Valerie had spent her entire adult life navigating affluent social circles, relying exclusively on aesthetics and manufactured gossip to cover her vast intellectual deficits. She assumed the corporate battlefield operated on the same petty rules as a neighborhood luncheon. She had absolutely no idea the innocuous leather briefcase resting near my feet contained the exact federal fraud documents required to annihilate her false reality. Derek sat beside her, looking noticeably less confident. The deep, dark bags under his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights following our tense parking garage confrontation. He fidgeted with his expensive silk tie, nervously glancing between Sterling and myself. However, seeing his new wife so intensely relaxed seemed to temporarily soothe his mounting panic. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, crossing his arms in a defensive posture, clearly expecting me to deliver a flimsy emotional plea disguised as an audit. Arthur Sterling cleared his throat, initiating the formal proceedings. I stood up, pressing a button on a remote control to lower the projector screen. I did not acknowledge the smug expression painted across Valerie's face. I launched directly into the clinical, operational metrics. My voice remained perfectly modulated, projecting the calm, absolute authority of a premier logistics principal. I guided the banking executives through a visual labyrinth of severe retail mismanagement. I displayed the staggering overhead costs associated with their prime commercial leases, located in the most expensive districts of the city. I highlighted the massive clusters of dead seasonal inventory choking their storage warehouses, demonstrating the catastrophic failure of their supply chain turnover rate. I mapped out the critical terminal cash flow deficit, proving mathematically that the retail boutique possessed absolutely zero salvageable equity. Throughout this initial phase, Valerie performed a masterclass in theatrical boredom. She sighed loudly, examining her manicured fingernails. She occasionally leaned over to whisper something dismissive into Derek's ear, prompting him to offer a strained, supportive chuckle. When I concluded the segment detailing her horrific inventory hoarding, she actually rolled her eyes. Arthur Sterling, noticing her blatant disrespect, raised a single silver eyebrow, but remained silent, allowing me to control the floor. She thought she had survived. She believed these standard failure metrics were merely the desperate, exaggerated complaints of a jealous woman. She was waiting for the bank to dismiss my findings and offer her a generous loan extension. I pressed another button, plunging the projection screen into total darkness. The sudden visual void instantly shifted the atmospheric pressure inside the room. I stepped away from the podium, walking slowly toward the center of the long oak table. I placed my hands flat against the cool, polished wood, maintaining direct, unblinking eye contact with the lead investigator sitting next to Sterling. The operational failures I just outlined are catastrophic. I stated my tone, dropping into a lethal, precise register. But they are entirely secondary to the primary financial anomaly plaguing this holding company. The boutique has managed to avoid a hard default for 18 months, despite generating zero actual profit. This artificial survival was financed through a series of massive emergency capital injections, originating from an external manufacturing plant. Derek stiffened his entire body, going completely rigid. He realized I was ignoring his parking lot threats. He opened his mouth to interrupt, preparing to offer a frantic excuse regarding a temporary commingling of marital assets. I held up my hand, silencing him instantly. However, I continued, refusing to look at my ex-husband. The most crucial discovery resides in how that stolen capital was subsequently deployed. Valerie claimed she required these massive loan extensions and emergency cash infusions to purchase exclusive imported luxury goods. Specifically, she submitted numerous invoices citing expensive artisan textiles and candles originating from a premium vendor in Milan, Italy. The smug, predatory smile completely vanished from Valerie's face, replaced by a sudden, confused tension. She gripped the handle of her quilted designer bag, her knuckles turning a stark pale white. I reached down and lifted the heavy black binder, placing it directly in front of the lead fraud investigator. I opened the cover, flipping to the section containing the high-resolution digital scans. My dedicated analytical team cross-referenced those specific Milan shipping invoices with international maritime freight manifests and domestic port authority databases, I explained, sliding the documents across the smooth oak surface. We discovered a complete categorical void. There were no cargo containers. There were no customs declarations. The luxury shipments never existed. The vendor in Milan is a phantom corporation. The investigator leaned forward, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket. The room descended into a terrifying, suffocating silence, broken only by the crisp sound of heavy paper turning. Valerie did not just mismanage a supply chain, I stated, my voice echoing like a final judicial sentence. She actively engaged in a highly sophisticated federal wire fraud operation. She utilized those phantom invoices to funnel the commercial loan money alongside the funds illegally siphoned from her husband's manufacturing plant, directly into an untraceable private offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. The investigator stopped turning pages. He stared intensely at a specific wire transfer authorization form. I pointed a steady finger at the bottom right corner of the document. Notice the primary guarantor signature authorizing the international transfer I instructed? Ensuring every person in the room absorbed the magnitude of the revelation. It is not a standard digital stamp. It is a physical authorization featuring a highly distinct cursive execution, specifically utilizing a small looping heart positioned directly above the lowercase vowel. Valerie stopped breathing entirely. Her mouth opened in a silent, desperate gasp for oxygen that her lungs refused to process. The color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking like a terrified, hollow mannequin. Her malicious country club whisper campaign, her designer dresses, her fabricated cosmopolitan persona, it all disintegrated into worthless ash in less than 30 seconds. The sheer, undeniable proof of her criminal exit strategy was sitting openly on the table, impossible to spin or deny. I slowly shifted my gaze, observing Derek. The physical transformation occurring across his features was devastating to witness. He stared at the forged documents, then turned his head slowly to look at his new wife. The realization hit his nervous system with the destructive force of a runaway freight train. He had destroyed his previous 20-year marriage, alienated his community, and committed severe corporate embezzlement to protect a woman he thought was merely struggling at retail management. The absolute truth finally pierced his blinding arrogance. Valerie had played him for an absolute fool. She was actively stealing the money he had stolen, risking his freedom to pad her own secret offshore escape hatch. She was planning to let him take the catastrophic legal fall while she vanished into a tropical jurisdiction. He was the clueless Mark, serving as the perfect fall guy for a manipulative predator. Arthur Sterling closed the black binder with a loud, sharp snap that made both Derek and Valerie physically jump in their seats. The bank executive did not yell. He did not express outrage. He simply turned to his lead investigator and calmly instructed him to immediately freeze every single financial asset attached to Delta Holdings Group and lock down the manufacturing plant accounts. He then picked up his telephone and dialed the direct line for the regional federal authorities. I gathered my presentation materials, sliding my laptop into my bag with calm, practiced efficiency. The boardroom execution was complete. The corporate bloodbath I promised myself had been delivered with absolute flawless precision. I walked out of the glass doors, leaving them trapped inside their collapsing world, but cornering a desperate man who has just lost his career, his wealth, and his freedom creates an incredibly volatile dynamic. Derek was now facing federal prison and absolute public ruin. I knew he would not accept his destruction quietly. When the federal agents inevitably arrived to place him in handcuffs, he would search for a miraculous lifeline. And in his twisted, narcissistic mind, he would inevitably conclude that the brilliant logistics consultant who uncovered the fraud was the only person capable of fixing it, leading him straight to my front porch for a desperate, unhinged reckoning. The swiftness of the corporate guillotine is a staggering phenomenon to witness. Arthur Sterling did not waste a single hour following our boardroom summit. By dawn on Friday, a fleet of dark sedans pulled up to the curb outside Valerie's flagship retail location in the most affluent shopping district of Little Rock. Federal agents swarmed the pristine showroom. Local news helicopters captured aerial footage of stern investigators carrying cardboard boxes filled with hard drives, forged vendor manifests, and fraudulent ledgers right past mannequins draped in overpriced imported linens. The meticulous illusion of a cosmopolitan mogul evaporated in the span of a single morning broadcast. The financial blowback targeting my ex-husband arrived with equal severity. The board of directors at the manufacturing plant convened an emergency executive session within minutes of receiving the frozen account notifications. They voted unanimously to suspend Derek without pay, pending a criminal inquiry. His access badges were deactivated. His corporate banking portals were locked. Because his personal wealth was heavily leveraged against the failing retail debt, the commercial lending institution immediately placed a freeze on his private portfolios. The sprawling suburban brick estate, the luxury vehicles, and the country club memberships were instantly inaccessible. The weekend dragged by in a state of suspended animation. By Sunday evening, the Arkansas sky turned a bruised, ominous purple before unleashing a torrential downpour across the region. I sat in the living room of my restored Craftsman home, a property nestled deep within the forested hills of Hot Springs. I bought this sanctuary using the first substantial profits generated by my logistics firm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, steady light across the hardwood floors. Outside, the rain lashed fiercely against the window panes, a relentless percussion that drowned out the ambient noise of the surrounding woods. The sudden, frantic pounding of a fist against my solid oak front door jolted me from my reading. I set my book on the side table and walked into the foyer. I did not flip on the exterior porch light. I leaned toward the reinforced glass pane beside the doorframe and peered into the stormy darkness. A solitary figure stood shivering on the welcome mat, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes of distant lightning. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open, keeping my hand firmly gripped around the brass handle. Derek stood on my porch, soaked to the bone. The icy rain plastered his graying hair to his forehead in jagged, uneven streaks. His expensive Italian wool coat hung ruined and heavy on his sagging frame, dripping muddy water onto the cedar planks. The arrogant, untouchable smirk he wore at the mall 3 years ago was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate terror. His skin held a sickly pale hue, and his shoulders shook involuntarily from the biting cold. He raised a trembling hand, attempting to wipe the water from his eyes. He looked remarkably fragile, a broken shell of the tyrant who had spent 2 decades micromanaging my existence. "Tina," he gasped, his voice cracking under the weight of his own despair. "Please, let me come inside, just for a few minutes." I did not step aside. I remained firmly planted in the threshold, acting as an unyielding physical barrier between the freezing storm and the warmth of my home. The man standing before me was a cornered, desperate animal, and I refused to surrender my tactical high ground. "State your business, Derek," I instructed, keeping my vocal register flat and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. He squeezed his eyes shut, and a fresh wave of tears mingled with the rain streaming down his cheeks. He launched into a frantic, sobbing monologue, his words tumbling out in a chaotic rush. The federal prosecutors were circling. The investigators had issued subpoenas for his personal financial records. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings on his primary residence. He was facing the very real, terrifying prospect of spending the next decade in a federal penitentiary for corporate embezzlement. He needed a lifeline, and he had exhausted every single ally in his elite social circle. His wealthy country club friends had abandoned him the moment the scandal hit the evening news. He was entirely isolated. "I need you to amend the audit," he pleaded, leaning closer to the doorframe. "You are the principal consultant. The bank trusts your analytical models. If you submit a revised addendum, you can change the narrative." I tilted my head, studying his face with clinical precision. "What exactly do you expect an addendum to accomplish?" I asked. "You can testify that the diverted manufacturing funds were just a clerical oversight," he begged, his tone growing increasingly frantic. "You can swear in federal court that it was a minor administrative error, a misallocation of resources, rather than a deliberate theft. If you sign an official affidavit stating the capital injections were an accounting mistake, the prosecutors will lose their intent argument. They will drop the embezzlement charges. I will just pay a fine. Please, Tina, you are the only person who holds enough industry credibility to make them believe it." The sheer audacity of his request hung in the damp air between us. He was asking me to risk my freedom, my logistics empire, and my professional integrity to shield him from the consequences of his own arrogance. He wanted me to commit felony perjury to save his skin. When I did not immediately respond, he deployed his ultimate psychological trap. He attempted to manipulate my empathy by weaponizing the ghosts of our shared past. He reached out his wet fingers, hovering inches from my sleeve, though he did not dare touch me. "We spent 20 years together," he whispered, manufacturing a fragile, penitent tone. "We built a life from nothing. Remember our first apartment, eating cheap takeout on the floor because we could not afford a dining table? You were the only real partner I ever possessed. Valerie cast a spell on me. She used my trust and my resources to fund her criminal schemes. She blinded me, Tina. I made a terrible mistake leaving you, but you cannot let me die in a concrete cell." It was a masterful, pathetic, theatrical performance. 3 years ago, standing in a cramped rented duplex, I might have fallen for the illusion of the returning, apologetic husband. I might have allowed my innate Southern hospitality and my maternal instinct to override my logic. Tonight I felt no anger, no sadness, and certainly no residual affection. I felt only a profound, chilling pity. I looked at him, dissecting his manipulation with brutal clarity. He did not love me. He never loved me. He loved the utility I provided. For 20 years, I managed his household, raised his son, and smoothed out the rough edges of his chaotic life. When he decided I was stagnant, he traded me for a younger, flashier model. Now that the shiny new toy had actively bankrupted him, he wanted to crawl back into my life, expecting me to sacrifice my own hard-earned corporate success to clean up his catastrophic mess. "You want me to lie under oath," I stated, stripping away his sentimental fluff and exposing the raw, ugly truth of his request. "You want me to commit perjury, destroying the logistics firm I built from the ashes you left me in, all to protect a man who threw me away the second he found a more glamorous option." Derek swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically as his strategic maneuvering failed to breach my defenses. "Tina," he choked out, "I am the father of your child." "And you will have plenty of time to reflect on that relationship during your federal incarceration," I replied, my voice as cold and unforgiving as the storm raging around us. He stared at me, the final remnants of his hope shattering against my unyielding posture. The realization settled deeply into his bones. There was no hidden reservoir of forgiveness waiting for him here. The submissive, obedient wife he once controlled had died a long time ago, replaced by a formidable executive who refused to compromise her honor for a coward. "You made your choice 3 years ago, Derek," I said, delivering the final definitive blow. "Now you get to live with the exact life you built." I did not wait for him to formulate a response. I stepped backward into the warm, illuminated foyer. I closed the heavy oak door, watching his ruined, weeping face disappear behind the solid wood. I reached up and slid the brass deadbolt firmly into place, the mechanical click echoing with a satisfying, permanent finality. I walked back into my living room, sat down by the roaring fire, and picked up my book. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of his presence from my porch. Derek was now backed into a terrifying legal corner, with empty pockets, 0 allies, and no false testimony to save him. Knowing I had firmly locked him out of my world, his only remaining option was to face the ruthless federal prosecutors and the vicious wrath of his new wife in a brutal, highly public courtroom war. The impending trial would demand a devastating pound of flesh, and I fully intended to watch their fraudulent empire implode from a safe, comfortable distance. The morning after the storm broke clear and unapologetically bright across the Arkansas Delta. Derek walked away from my port with his tailored coat ruined by the freezing rain, leaving behind his final chance at unearned salvation. He had sought a miraculous escape hatch, but found only the impenetrable wall of my indifference. Without my fabricated testimony shielding him from the federal prosecutors, the walls of his financial fortress crumbled with astonishing speed. Faced with the undeniable evidence of corporate embezzlement, my former husband was forced into a brutal plea agreement. The prosecutors offered him a stark binary choice. He could face a lengthy trial that would invariably result in a decade behind bars, or he could immediately liquidate his remaining manufacturing shares to pay full restitution to his former employers. Derek, being a creature of supreme cowardice, chose the latter. He sold his equity under extreme duress, accepting a fraction of its actual market value. The forced liquidation drained every single dime he possessed. It also triggered a fatal clause in his professional standing. As part of the federal sentencing agreement, the presiding judge permanently barred him from ever holding a management or executive position within any corporate entity. The man who had defined his entire self-worth by his corner office and his ability to intimidate subordinates was legally stripped of his command. His career in the logistics and manufacturing sector evaporated into thin air. While Derek accepted his crushing plea deal, Valerie chose a radically different path. She possessed an intoxicating delusion regarding her own persuasive charm. She genuinely believed she could manipulate a federal jury, utilizing the same theatrical pout and manufactured tears she deployed at country club luncheons. She pleaded not guilty, forcing the wire fraud case into a highly publicized public trial. I did not attend the proceedings in person, preferring to remain focused on expanding my own logistics enterprise. However, the daily transcripts and local news broadcasts provided a thorough, vivid portrait of her unraveling. Valerie took the witness stand during the second week of the trial. She wore a subdued pastel dress, hoping to project an aura of naive innocence. The performance began with quiet weeping. She painted herself as a bewildered, overwhelmed retail owner who relied entirely on her experienced corporate husband to handle the complicated financial paperwork. Under the gentle questioning of her defense attorney, she claimed Derek orchestrated the offshore accounts to hide his own stolen manufacturing funds. She swore he forced her to sign the international wire transfers, dictating her every move. Her strategy was crystal clear. She intended to throw the man who sacrificed his entire career to fund her vanity project directly under a moving bus. She severed their marriage on the witness stand, sacrificing Derek to save her own skin. Unfortunately for Valerie, federal prosecutors do not care about country club theatrics. During cross-examination, the lead attorney displayed the high-resolution scans of the wire authorizations on a large monitor facing the jury box. He highlighted the distinctive looping heart hovering over the lowercase vowel. He then introduced a mountain of secondary evidence, including her private text messages to the offshore banking proxies, and digital timestamps proving Derek was in a different state when the phantom Milan invoices were generated. The prosecutor dismantled her fragile defense with surgical precision. Valerie could not handle the intense, unyielding scrutiny. When cornered by undeniable facts, her carefully curated facade cracked. Her naive weeping transformed into sharp, defensive shouting. She insulted the prosecutor. She sneered at the jury. Her inherent toxic narcissism bled through the pastel dress, exposing the cold, calculating predator hiding underneath. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts of federal wire fraud. She was remanded into federal custody immediately, trading her designer handbags for a standard-issue correctional uniform. Their marriage, built on a foundation of betrayal and fueled by stolen capital, imploded in the most public, humiliating manner conceivable. With both guarantors neutralized, Arthur Sterling and the commercial lending institution moved swiftly to recoup their staggering losses. The bank executed immediate foreclosure protocols across the entire Delta Holdings portfolio. The sleek, upscale boutiques, located in the wealthiest shopping districts of Little Rock, were shuttered overnight. Heavy steel padlocks were secured around the polished brass handles. Bright orange legal notices were taped against the pristine glass display windows, signaling the definitive end of her retail reign. The bank did not stop at the retail storefronts. During the height of their financial delusion, Derek had purchased a sprawling commercial warehouse in the industrial district, utilizing a secondary line of credit. He intended to use the cavernous facility to store the overflowing shipments of luxury goods Valerie insisted on importing. The structure was an architectural behemoth, featuring reinforced concrete floors, high-clearance loading docks, and extensive administrative offices. The bank seized the property, locking the gates and retaining the vast quantities of dead inventory rotting inside. The empire they had constructed over the graves of my 20-year marriage burned to ash. The devastating fire was ignited by the very audit they tried so desperately to stop. The aftermath left Derek existing in a reality that felt like a brilliant stroke of cosmic irony. Stripped of his executive credentials, his seized bank accounts, and his affluent network, he still required a basic income to survive and pay his court-ordered probation fees. The Arkansas job market is unforgiving to a man carrying a federal felony record for financial crimes. The former regional manager was forced to accept a position as a general warehouse laborer at a small agricultural supply depot located deep in the rural delta. His new reality consisted of unloading heavy pallets of fertilizer and stacking feed sacks in the suffocating, humid southern heat. He traded his custom Italian suits for a high-visibility safety vest and a pair of cheap work boots. The most striking detail of his new existence was his compensation. During our encounter at the mall, Valerie had smugly offered me a pity job working as a stock girl for $18 an hour. She presented the wage as an insulting charitable gesture aimed at a discarded, useless woman. Derek was now performing grueling, back-breaking manual labor for $17.50 an hour. He spent his days hauling freight for a fraction of the wage his imprisoned wife had weaponized against me. He spent his nights in a cramped studio apartment located adjacent to a noisy rail yard. He possessed nothing. He controlled no one. He was a ghost haunting the lowest tier of the supply chain industry he once ruled. The poetic justice was so profound it required no interference or commentary from me. The universe had balanced the scales with flawless, brutal symmetry. I allowed myself a brief, quiet moment of satisfaction as I read the final foreclosure notice published in the local business journal. The chapter containing Derek and Valerie was permanently closed. My focus shifted entirely toward the future of Hugh's supply chain and logistics. My firm was experiencing exponential growth, having recently secured a lucrative municipal infrastructure contract, despite the failed Whisper campaign. We were rapidly expanding our operations, and our current office space was proving woefully inadequate to handle the incoming volume of regional freight coordination. We urgently needed a centralized logistics hub. We required a facility with high-clearance loading docks, reinforced flooring, and extensive administrative capabilities. A few weeks later, a certified letter arrived on my mahogany desk from the Commercial Lending Department. Arthur Sterling was formally inviting my firm to participate in a closed public auction. The bank was eager to liquidate their seized real estate assets to clear their balance sheets before the fiscal year ended. I opened the thick manila envelope and reviewed the property listing. The primary asset scheduled for the auction block was a vast commercial warehouse located in the prime industrial district. It was the exact same facility Derek had purchased to house his fraudulent empire. A slow, deliberate smile formed on my face. The pieces were aligning perfectly. I picked up my phone and instructed my chief financial officer to prepare a certified cashier check, pulling the funds directly from the substantial consulting fee the bank had paid us to conduct the terminal audit. We were going to a real estate auction, and I fully intended to return with the deed. The bitter Arkansas winter eventually surrendered to a humid, vibrant spring. During those 6 intervening months, my logistics enterprise evolved from a successful regional player into an undeniable statewide powerhouse. We had officially secured the sprawling municipal infrastructure contract, integrating our systems directly with the county government. My calendar overflowed with freight coordination schedules, extending across the entire southern corridor. The modest office suite overlooking the river was no longer sufficient. My analysts were sharing cramped desks, bumping elbows while running complex supply chain algorithms. The conference room was permanently buried under architectural blueprints, transit maps, and endless stacks of vendor invoices. We desperately required a centralized operational hub to sustain our exponential growth trajectory. We needed high-clearance bays, reinforced concrete floors, and extensive administrative square footage to house our expanding fleet operations. Arthur Sterling delivered the perfect solution via certified mail. The commercial lending institution was finally clearing their balance sheets, scheduling a public auction to liquidate the seized real estate portfolio of Delta Holdings Group. The crown jewel of that specific portfolio was the sprawling industrial warehouse my ex-husband had purchased during the peak of his financial delusion. He had intended to use that cavernous facility to store the fraudulent luxury inventory his new wife kept importing on paper. The structure sat empty for half a year, accumulating dust and carrying the heavy, toxic stigma of a highly publicized federal scandal. Other local investors viewed the property as cursed ground. They whispered about bad luck and tainted assets at their country club luncheons. I viewed it as a prime logistical fortress, waiting to be claimed. I sat at my mahogany desk, holding the glossy auction catalog. The photograph of the building showed pristine, corrugated steel siding and endless rows of elevated loading docks. I called my chief financial officer into the room, instructing him to prepare a certified cashier check for the upcoming bidding floor. I provided highly specific instructions regarding the exact origin of those funds. We did not touch our standard operating revenue. We did not dip into the municipal contract advances. The check was drafted, utilizing the precise consulting fee the bank had paid my firm to conduct the terminal audit on my former friend's retail boutique. The physical weight of that paper rectangle felt incredibly potent in my hands. The poetic symmetry of the transaction sent a warm, satisfying hum through my veins. I was taking the exact money earned by exposing their federal crimes and utilizing those funds to acquire their most valuable physical asset. The public auction took place on a damp Tuesday morning inside a drab municipal annex building located in downtown Little Rock. The air inside the room smelled of stale coffee floor wax and nervous perspiration. Rows of uncomfortable folding chairs faced a scarred wooden podium. A handful of local real estate developers and regional distributors milled around reviewing their catalogs, speaking in hushed competitive tones. Among them stood Jim Tucker, the sexist timber cooperative competitor who had unsuccessfully tried to steal my first major contract years earlier. He spotted me walking down the center aisle and let out a derisive scoff. He wore an outdated seersucker suit, projecting the tired, arrogant aura of an obsolete boys' club. I ignored his posturing. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer, crisp trousers, and my scuffed steel-toe boots. I took a seat in the very front row, resting my leather portfolio on my lap. I held a numbered plastic bidding paddle in my right hand, keeping my posture rigid and my expression unreadable. The room quieted as the auctioneer, a brisk, severe man with a booming voice, stepped up to the podium and initiated the proceedings. He moved quickly through several minor foreclosed properties before announcing the prime industrial warehouse. He recited the structural specifications, highlighting the premium loading docks, the fenced security perimeter, and the expansive square footage. Because the property carried the heavy taint of a prominent local scandal, the opening reserve price was set astonishingly low. It was a mere fraction of the actual market value. Jim Tucker raised his paddle, trying to establish early dominance. He wanted the warehouse to expand his own struggling freight operations. He glanced toward my chair, flashing a condescending grin, expecting me to shrink away from a bidding war. I did not react. I let the auctioneer call the opening bid and waited for two other developers to cautiously enter the fray. The price climbed incrementally, but the stigma surrounding the building kept the bidding remarkably sluggish. The other developers dropped out, leaving only Jim Tucker acting as if he had already secured the deed. He adjusted his tie, looking entirely too pleased with his own perceived victory. The auctioneer called for a final price increase. I waited until the very last possible second before raising my plastic paddle. I did not offer a minor incremental bump. I stood up and stated a definitive, preemptive cash figure. The number I called out was mathematically calculated to be exactly $10,000 above his maximum known credit ceiling. I had audited his timber operations years ago and possessed a flawless memory regarding his debt ratios. I knew exactly where his financial breaking point resided. Jim Tucker turned a deep shade of crimson. His jaw tightened as he furiously ran the numbers in his head, realizing he was outmatched. He glared at me, his eyes narrowing in frustrated defeat. He slowly lowered his paddle. He lacked the liquid capital to continue the fight, and we both knew it. The auctioneer scanned the quiet room, adjusting his microphone. "Going once?" he announced, his voice echoing off the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles. "Going twice?" The heavy wooden gavel came down, striking the podium with a sharp, resounding crack. "Sold to the bidder in the front row." The transfer of the deed required less than an hour of administrative paperwork. By early afternoon, I held the heavy brass keys to the sprawling industrial complex. I drove out to the industrial district, parking my sedan near the towering steel security gates. I unlocked the main entrance and stepped across the threshold. The interior of the warehouse was breathtakingly immense. Sunlight streamed through high, clear-story windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the cavernous space. My footsteps echoed against the pristine, reinforced concrete floors, producing a sharp, rhythmic cadence. The air smelled of fresh paint, cured cement, and unlimited potential. The facility possessed state-of-the-art climate control, premium administrative suites, and enough logistical floor space to accommodate a fleet of transport vehicles. My ex-husband had signed the original mortgage, hoping to build an empire of imported illusions for his fraudulent wife. Now the building belonged to me. I walked over to a thick structural support pillar, placing my palm flat against the cold steel beam. I had legally acquired the physical manifestation of their arrogance, paying pennies on the dollar. The profound depth of this victory washed over me in the quiet, empty space. I had literally purchased their former empire, utilizing the exact currency I generated by destroying it. It was the ultimate, irrefutable triumph. But as I walked up the metal staircase toward the sprawling, empty executive suite on the second floor, I realized my work was not entirely finished. This building was destined to become the operational heart of Hughes' supply chain and logistics, but it possessed enough square footage to serve a much higher purpose. I looked out over the vast, empty floor, preparing to build a legacy that extended far beyond corporate revenge, preparing to lift others out of the exact same darkness I had conquered. Exactly 12 months have passed since the sharp, echoing crack of the auctioneer gavel awarded me the permanent deed. The sprawling industrial complex is no longer an echoing cavern of empty space, carrying the heavy, toxic stigma of a highly publicized federal scandal. Today, it is a thriving, humming organism operating at peak efficiency. A steady fleet of heavy transport trucks, bearing the Hughes supply chain emblem, rolls steadily through the reinforced security gates from dawn until dusk. The expansive loading docks operate with flawless, rhythmic precision. Skilled operators navigate yellow forklifts, pivoting and gliding across the pristine concrete floors, carrying heavy wooden pallets stacked high with agricultural components, forestry equipment, and municipal infrastructure materials. My dedicated team of analytical experts no longer shares cramped desks, bumping elbows in a tiny rented suite. They operate from spacious, glass-walled offices overlooking the main logistics floor, monitoring state-of-the-art regional transit algorithms on dual widescreen monitors. The air inside the facility smells of rich, dark roast coffee, fresh printer ink, and the undeniable metallic scent of unbridled industrial progress. I stand on the elevated steel catwalk, observing the seamless execution of a complex freight routing system I coded myself. I have successfully constructed the premier logistics headquarters in the entire state of Arkansas. Yet the true, enduring heart of this sprawling operation does not reside on the main industrial floor, among the roaring engines and shifting cargo. When I drafted the initial architectural blueprints for the warehouse renovation, I deliberately allocated the entire upper level for a distinctly different vital purpose. The expansive square footage that my ex-husband originally envisioned as a lavish corner executive suite now houses a brightly lit, modern educational facility. I utilized a substantial portion of our annual corporate profits to establish a dedicated nonprofit training center. We designed the rigorous curriculum specifically for older women, attempting to re-enter the modern workforce after enduring severe life disruptions. The classrooms feature rows of high-speed computer terminals, interactive digital whiteboards, and comprehensive literature detailing advanced inventory software protocols. We teach these resilient students complex supply chain management, digital literacy, corporate communication, and intricate data analytics. We take women who have been discarded by society, marginalized by rampant ageism, or financially ruined by devastating divorces, and we forge them into highly sought-after corporate assets. I walk away from the metal catwalk and push open the heavy double doors leading into the main instructional hall. Today marks the triumphant culmination of our intensive 6-month certification program. A dozen remarkable women sit in the front rows, wearing crisp, affordable business attire, radiating a palpable, intense sense of nervous pride. My gaze settles on a specific student sitting near the center aisle. She is a 50-year-old single mother who spent the last 2 decades raising 3 children while working grueling, invisible hours cleaning residential homes to make ends meet. She came to our program hesitant and terrified, convinced her lack of a formal college degree rendered her permanently invisible to the lucrative corporate sector. I watch her stand up, smoothing her skirt, and walk toward the wooden podium to receive her official logistics certification diploma. Her hands tremble slightly as her fingers grip the heavy textured paper. Tears of profound validation well in her dark eyes. She holds a verified document that guarantees her an entry-level supervisory position at a regional distribution center, starting at a salary she previously considered an unattainable fantasy. Seeing her shoulders pull back and her chin lift triggers a deep, resonant warmth within my chest. I see my own painful journey reflected perfectly in her newfound, unshakable resilience. Watching her return to her seat, clutching the diploma against her chest, I allow my mind to drift backward through time. My thoughts return to that humid, sweltering afternoon at the Little Rock Promenade 3 years ago. I clearly picture the harsh fluorescent lights glaring down on the shattered glass pieces of a $1,200 smartphone. I remember the sickly, patronizing tone of my former best friend offering me a pity job working as a stock girl for a mere $18 an hour. She handed me a glossy promotional flyer, believing she was delivering a final humiliating blow to a defeated, pathetic rival. My ex-husband stood right beside her, wearing his signature arrogant smirk, fully convinced he had successfully stripped me of my identity, my wealth, and my inherent value. They both fundamentally misunderstood the core mechanics of my existence. They assumed that by terminating my 20-year marriage, they were taking away my singular source of worth. They thought I was a fragile, decorative ornament, incapable of surviving outside the protective, insulated walls of their affluent social circle. In reality, their cruel betrayal performed an extraordinary, unintentional favor. They did not destroy my hidden potential. They simply severed the heavy, restrictive anchor that had kept me submerged in stagnant, suffocating water for 2 decades. By forcing me into a desperate corner, they ignited a dormant, fierce survival instinct that burned away my quiet subservience and forged an unyielding executive operator. The poetic justice of our current circumstances requires no embellishment. Valerie and Derek are currently paying the agonizing steep price for their staggering hubris. She is wearing a drab, standard-issue uniform, locked inside a federal penitentiary, while he hauls heavy feed sacks in the sweltering Delta heat for minimum wage. Their fraudulent empire, built on lies and stolen capital, collapsed under the immense, crushing weight of their own deceit. Meanwhile, the discarded housewife they mocked at the shopping mall is currently standing on the top floor of the very building they purchased to hide their criminal enterprise. The arduous journey from a cramped rented duplex in Hot Springs to the apex of the Arkansas logistics industry required countless sleepless nights, navigating brutal rejections and maintaining unwavering ironclad discipline. I learned a crucial lesson during those dark, lonely hours. The young corporate gatekeepers will rarely invite you to sit at their polished mahogany tables. You cannot politely ask the professional world to recognize your inner strength. You must compel them to see it through undeniable, tangible results. To any woman standing in the smoldering ashes of a shattered life, staring at an uncertain, terrifying future, I offer this hard-earned truth. Let the arrogant fools mock your practical shoes and your resume gaps. Let them underestimate your sharp intelligence and mistake your quiet endurance for weakness. Do not waste your precious energy engaging in their petty whisper campaigns or fighting for scraps of hollow social validation. Instead, channel every ounce of your searing grief into relentless, focused action. Keep your head down and build your foundation in the dark, far away from their prying, judgmental eyes. Cultivate your skills, refine your strategic mind, and quietly accumulate your undeniable power. And when the time is finally right, when you are ready to step out of the shadows and into the glaring light of day, do not just ask for a key to their corporate castle. Make sure you own the entire building. The dust has finally settled over the Arkansas Delta, and the sprawling industrial warehouse that now bears my company's name stands as a quiet monument to survival. When I walk the pristine concrete floors today, listening to the rhythmic hum of forklifts and the steady pulse of commerce, I am often struck by a profound realization. This entire agonizing journey, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the grueling reinvention, and the ultimate acquisition of the very empire designed to destroy me, was never truly about corporate revenge. At its core, this was a fierce, uncompromising curriculum in parenting. It was about the legacy of character I was leaving for my son Cody and the unvarnished truth of what it actually means to sustain a family in modern America. We are raised within a culture that deeply romanticizes the traditional family structure. The American dream sells us a beautiful, tightly packaged narrative, a successful husband providing financial security, a devoted wife managing the domestic sanctuary, and children growing up safely within that impenetrable suburban bubble. For 20 years, I bought into that illusion. I believed my invisible sacrifices, the abandoned career ambitions, the late nights balancing household ledgers, the quiet management of Derek's chaotic schedule, were the essential glue holding our family together. I believed that shielding my son from the harsh realities of the world and from the deep flaws in his father's character was the definition of good parenting. But a sanctuary built on deceit is merely a glass house waiting for a stone. When Derek and Valerie shattered our family, leaving me stranded in a rented duplex with nothing but a void where my future used to be, my initial instinct as a mother was profound shame. I felt I had failed Cody. I felt the broken home was a stain on his upbringing. However, as the initial shock subsided and the cold reality of my situation set in, my perspective shifted. True family responsibility does not mean maintaining a flawless, smiling facade while the floorboards rot beneath your feet. True responsibility requires a terrifying level of emotional awareness and a commitment to radical honesty. I had to teach my son that fairness in life is not a guarantee handed down by a benevolent universe. It is a boundary you must fiercely enforce yourself. As I began to build Hugh's supply chain and logistics from scratch, wearing scuffed steel-toe boots and driving across the sun-baked delta, I was consciously drafting a new map for my child to follow. I wanted Cody to witness the sheer grit required to rebuild a life. When he called from college, checking on his mother, who had just been discarded by society, I did not sugarcoat the difficulty of the job market, nor did I tear down his father with petty insults. Emotional awareness means recognizing that a child's love for a parent is complex, and poisoning that well only damages the child. I let Derek's own actions serve as his defining testament. Therein lies the deepest lesson of long-term guidance. Children do not learn integrity from the lectures we deliver in comfortable living rooms. They absorb our values by watching how we navigate the darkest, most terrifying corridors of our lives. Derek offered Cody a masterclass in hollow ambition. He demonstrated that taking shortcuts, exploiting trust, and prioritizing vanity over substance ultimately leads to a terrifying collapse. By commingling funds and participating in Valerie's wire fraud, Derek proved that a man who lacks an ethical bedrock will eventually crush himself under the weight of his own lies. Conversely, every late night I spent coding logistics algorithms, every sexist gatekeeper I outmaneuvered in the boardroom, and every honest dollar I earned through sheer intellectual endurance was a silent, powerful lesson for my son. When Derek appeared on my porch in the freezing rain, begging me to commit perjury to save him from federal prison, closing that door was the most vital parenting decision of my life. I was showing Cody that loyalty has limits, and you must never compromise your own moral center to rescue someone who willingly jumped off a cliff. This is the reality of family responsibility that we often shy away from discussing. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever had to dismantle the illusion of a perfect life to build something authentic and true, know that your struggle has immense value. Your resilience is the light guiding the next generation. Please consider subscribing and following Emily Told Stories, where we continue to explore the raw, beautiful, and sometimes brutal realities of human endurance. We share these journeys because our stories are the survival guides we leave for one another. We hold on to a deeply ingrained conventional wisdom that a shattered family leaves a child permanently broken. We are taught that divorce, financial ruin, and the loss of the traditional home are the ultimate failures of parenthood, traumas that our children will spend a lifetime attempting to overcome. But I have come to embrace a fiercely unconventional truth. The greatest gift I ever gave my son was not the sprawling brick estate in the suburbs, the fully funded college accounts, or the illusion of a perfect marriage. The greatest gift I gave him was the shattering of that illusion. By breaking the mold Derek inadvertently gave me, the opportunity to show Cody the raw, unvarnished anatomy of survival. Protecting children from the sight of our suffering does a profound disservice to their future. If they never see us bleed, they will never learn how to apply a tourniquet when the world inevitably cuts them. The most powerful foundation you can provide for a child is not a life completely free of storms, but the living, breathing proof that a human being can stand in the absolute center of a hurricane, lose everything, and still retain the power to rebuild the city. Perhaps the traditional family is not defined by a flawless roster of roles, but by the transmission of an unbreakable spirit. As I look out over the logistics empire I built from the ashes, I realize the truest inheritance I leave behind is not the wealth, the warehouse, or the corporate title. It is the quiet, chilling knowledge that the fire meant to consume you can always be repurposed to light your way home. And one must wonder, when the next storm inevitably breaks across the horizon, who will be left seeking shelter, and who will be the one holding the keys to the fortress